Emily didn't say a word. "It's free," she heard a woman's voice bring her back to reality. "Yes," the girl replied absent-mindedly and set her bag on the floor. An older woman sat next to her hands folded in her lap. She sighed sadly as the train started and took them forward through the gray spring landscapes of fields and forest. The passengers got to talking on the way, and after entering the city, Emily helped an elderly woman carry her heavy bags to the bus stop. She had come from the village to visit relatives, but no one had met her. Emily looked sadly at the departing bus. She felt sorry for the lonely old woman, though she was no less lonely herself. At least she had a place to go. And the girl in this city, no one would give her a corner for nothing. However, such travels through the cities of the region, one could say, had already become a habit during the last months when she was traveling in search of income and housing. She was hired to work at markets selling vegetables and fruit, as a dishwasher, at least for the time of sick leave and short vacations, as a janitor. And if she was lucky, a miner. She didn't stay anywhere for long, and she was glad of any opportunity to get some money to pay for room and board. Even that seemed a good life compared to what she'd had before. Still in her nightmares, she saw the endless field, the searing sun that made dark spots appear before her eyes, and her aunt's, "Who else would want you but me? Yeah, anyone would have kicked you out on the street a long time ago," her squeaky voice echoed in my head. "Next stop," announced the conductor, and the childhood memories dissipated. She went in search of work at the warehouses, car washes, and gas stations on the outskirts of town. Among them were diners and diners where she could also try her luck. My shoes were soaked, my bag was weighing down on my shoulders, but there was nowhere to go. She had to find something for the day, otherwise she would be homeless tomorrow. Mostly they refused politely and quietly. But at one of the car washes, the receptionist for some reason took her for a beggar and shouted in front of the other employees, "Get out of here. It's fashionable to walk around. I will not give you any work. You'll steal something else or worse." The driver, who had come to pay, looked at Emily, and she felt very uncomfortable. He was holding a cup of coffee in a paper bag with a brownie he'd just bought at the local buffet. The girl hadn't eaten anything since this morning. "Sorry," she hurriedly said, and quickly walked outside. It felt like she had just been doused in slop. How she hated her poverty at this moment. And she was not asking for alms, but wanted to earn an honest living. "Can I give you a ride?" came a man's voice from somewhere. "What?" Emily was confused. "And if you can, that would be great. Get it." It was the same man she'd run into at the car wash. A few minutes ago, driving by, he had stopped and looked out the open window. Once inside the car, Emily felt uncomfortable for the second time. The interior was clean, modern, and smelled very pleasantly of fragrance and expensive men's perfume. The girl even looked shyly at the driver and pondered to herself why he had stopped. Pity, an unpleasant thought flashed through her head. "Where do you want to go? To the nearest hostel of some kind, the cheapest one?" the man asked. The man turned on the navigator and used it to find the right address. Emily was angry at herself for having bypassed so few organizations and was afraid that tomorrow she would suffer the same fate. "Are you looking for a job?" the new acquaintance asked, either noticing the passenger's sad face or just out of politeness. "Yes," she replied faintly. "And what do you do for a living?" he asked, pulling up outside a gray, unassuming building labeled hostel clerk dishwasher, basically whatever they'll take. "Thank you very much." She was about to leave, but the man suddenly perked up. "Do you have a medical book?" "Yes, my name is Jason." He held out his hand. "And I'm Emily," she replied, a little surprised. "Emily, if you're looking for a job, why don't you go as a dishwasher at a restaurant? I have an employee who left unexpectedly due to illness, and the season is about to start. And there's a lot to do. Looking for someone new is always a problem." "Oh wow," Emily was completely confused. "Interesting. Write down my number. Come back tomorrow for an interview." "I don't have a phone. I'll write it down on a piece of paper." Jason dictated the address and left. Emily paid for a place in the hostel for the night, showered, and snacked on the bun she'd kept in her bag all day to eat when she got unbearably hungry. Finally, she crawled under the covers. Luckily, the room was barely occupied, and the two roommates were lying quietly in their beds, staring into their phones. And why would he do that? Emily asked herself, stroking her stomach. Her thoughts darted from one extreme to the other. At first, the girl was sure the man was a con artist, tricking naive fools into doing something illegal. Why? I only told him about the phone. Now he'll think that no one will even look for me in case of anything, she chastised herself. Then she suddenly imagined a beautiful, clean restaurant where the food smelled warm and delicious. She wanted to go there and eat to her heart's content with that pleasant feeling. The image of the casual acquaintance changed dramatically. Now he seemed like a kind and helpful person. Maybe he really needs a dishwasher urgently. He felt sorry for me and found out that I was looking for just such a job. So he offered it to me. What's the big deal? It's worth a shot. After all, washing dishes in a restaurant is still better than selling at the market. But think about it, she continued her inner dialogue as she fell asleep. She was determined that tomorrow she would go to the address and try to get a job. The morning was rainy and overcast. Her shoulders and legs were aching unpleasantly after yesterday's adventures. Emily, hello. Jason greeted her as she entered his office. Come on in, have a seat. Hello. Emily replied, once again feeling awkward. Her companion was sitting in his chair with his legs apart, the top buttons of his white shirt undone, and she noted to herself that he was quite handsome. Ready to get started in the next few days. I have a lot of guests in my kitchen right now. See, the thing is, I'm pregnant. There was a momentary pause, but it seemed to Emily that Jason had been silent for too long, and she was about to get up and leave. He didn't seem to be thinking of kicking her out, though. So let's do it this way, he said seriously. I'll give you a month's salary in advance so that you can rent a room for the first time. Don't refuse. I need a responsible employee, and without a permanent home, you're unlikely to do a good job. Emily didn't know how to respond. It was rare that anyone cared about her. So now it was hard to hold back tears, so much so that she was touched by her future boss's behavior. Jason did give her the money, and she rented a room near the restaurant. After getting to know the staff, Emily began her duties. Despite the constant bustle in the kitchen, she enjoyed washing dishes. She seemed to be the most cheerful in this new company. The cooks and waitresses often complained about their paychecks and lack of days off. But it's not like they were wandering around town with one bag looking for some part-time work for fear of being left on the street. Emily shrugged, smiling. The only person who disliked the new girl was the receptionist, Paul. This short, chubby man with a round face, which almost always lit up with a friendly smile, for some reason began to pick on her from the first minute. Appearances rest less often and work more. He remarked as he passed by as she took a seat in a chair. At that moment, his smile seemed venomous and mocking to her. And what did I ever do to him? Emily sighed, pacing home. Her whole body felt immensely tired. The only way to eat a good dinner was at work. So all she wanted to do on the way home was fall on her bed and sleep until morning. Oops, someone behind her nudged her. Where are you from, baby? There was a small white puppy sitting at the entrance to the supermarket with red spots on his sides and a thin tail that dangled cheerfully from side to side. Emily stroked the puppy's head and went inside. When she left the store, she bought a bag of dog food just in case. Her worst fears were realized. The little boy was sitting on the sidewalk nearby, as if waiting for someone. The street was empty, and behind her back, the vendor closed the door from the inside, obviously preparing to clean up and go home. But what am I going to do with you, silly? Emily asked sadly. As the puppy greedily devoured the food, she followed him all the way home, soaking wet from the rain. Skinny, panicked just like her, unwanted and alone like herself. She walked into the entryway and called the elevator. At the 10th floor, it descended, not lingering anywhere, and she was irresistibly drawn back. Finally, she couldn't stand it, waved her hand, and stepped outside. The puppy crouched against the wall, trying to hide from the rain. At the sight of Emily, he stood up and his tail wiggled hesitantly. Okay, let's go, just be quiet. She took him under her arm after all and headed into the apartment. Luckily, the hallway was empty and no one was cooking in the kitchen. She walked to her room, opened the door, left her shopping, and carried the puppy into the bathroom to hastily wash and feed him. Then she went back to her room and closed up. Surprisingly, he didn't run, barked, ate yesterday's porridge mixed with food, and fell sound asleep on the mat by the bed. Unable to think of what to do with him next, Emily washed her face and fell asleep. Over time, as the baby grew older and she accustomed him to taking morning and evening walks, Emily grew accustomed to her new life. More than once, she thought that the decision to have a dog in a communal apartment was the height of insanity. However, fate favored them. In the meantime, a noisy man who liked to scandalize moved out of the next room. So they were left with Emily, a quiet, inconspicuous student who came only to sleep, and an equally quiet woman whom they met occasionally in the kitchen or on the stairs. None of them had made any complaints about the puppy. So she settled in. What was really hard to do was to keep hiding the pregnancy from her coworkers. She didn't want to be pitied or ask unnecessary questions that she herself would have had trouble answering. But it was impossible to avoid the topic forever either. "Emily, confess, are you expecting a baby?" Dana, the blonde waitress, once asked, nodding toward her already rounded tummy. "Yes, I'm expecting," Emily replied simply. Wow. The girl's eyebrows crept upward in surprise. She looked at her coworker with big eyes, but then added with a smile, "I'm happy for you." That evening, when they had already left, Dana gathered everyone in the locker room and broke. Everyone, except the receptionist, treated the new girl well. So they didn't mind congratulating her, and in a couple of days, a folding crib was purchased in the closet, and in the refrigerator food for a feast was saved. There was nothing to do. "Congratulate her on being pregnant," Jason said arrogantly, in response to the offer to join the group. Without him, however, there were plenty of people willing to join. Everyone from the cooks and waiters to the janitor and the janitorial staff joined in the festivity. Emily was moved to tears. She had not expected such a warm attitude on the part of total strangers and new people. And their gift came just in time, especially since they delivered and assembled it themselves. Now in the corner of Emily's room stood a pretty wooden crib with a blue mattress and pillows, and above it rock stars made of soft felt. And after the feast, for the first time in years, she was able to speak out and put into words all her pain, fears, and hopes. "I'm sorry if I'm minding my own business," Dana began when they were left alone to clean up the table. It was immediately clear what she wanted to ask: who's the father of the baby? After a moment's silence, Emily decided to speak. Her colleague was not the kind of person who spread gossip and asked only for the sake of idle curiosity. But still, telling about her personal life was very hard. "You don't have to tell me if you want to," Dana remarked, sensing the awkward pause. "He came to visit us in the village, to our relatives, businesslike, so handsome, in a car. We ran into him one day outside the store. We got to talking. He walked me almost home. 'Where in the middle of nowhere did you find such a beautiful girl?' I asked, and I blossomed. I thought I was in love. I thought I was, but I didn't. I wasn't actually in love. Only he wasn't what I thought he was. But that's something you don't realize right away." "So how did you end up here?" Dana asked. "He snuck me out and took me to the city," said Emily. "Really?" But seeing the horror in Dana's eyes, she smiled, like snatched me, sedated me with sleeping pills, and drove me away in a car. "No, I went on my own, and even happily at the time. I lived with my aunt." She worked on her relative's farm as a child. When her aunt found out that Emily had been sneaking out on dates, she pressed her, rebuked her, saying she was ungrateful and should pray to her for sheltering an orphan after her parents died. Dana blurted out in her heart. Emily cried but agreed with her. She was forced to work longer hours than usual, forced to spend her evenings in the vegetable garden, as if her hopes were dashed for something good. Cut off. He had to leave that day, and she shed so many tears that she could have watered all the beds with them. "But he didn't leave without you." No, she didn't notice anything from her grief. And he stood behind the fence and called to her softly. "You want to hurry?" he said. She nodded. Her heart was pounding like crazy, as if ready to jump out of her chest. How had her aunt not noticed? She still wondered, but he helped her over the fence, and the car was parked nearby. That's how she found herself in a house dress and dirty slippers in the city. What happened next? Dana asked impatiently. He rented an apartment. I lived in it for a while, bought me some clothes, and showed me around the city. It went on like that for a month and a half until I found out he was married. There was a lump in my throat, but I didn't want to cry. Apparently, the pain from those events gradually faded into the past. He said we either live like this or we split up. It turns out that it was just a hobby for him, a way to take a break from his wife and children. That's how I ended up on the street. I couldn't go back to my aunt. She'd eat me by train. I started to survive on temporary earnings, traveling around the cities in search of housing and food. And then I got pregnant like a snowball. At first, I didn't want to believe it, but no, my belly's growing. I haven't even been to the hospital once. How? Exclaimed Dana. Make sure you go. You have to get attached and get checked out. And histories, of course. You're good for coming to us. Luck. She smiled. Days went by. It turned out that even David's constant taunts and displeasure were something to get used to. It was getting harder and harder to do the dishes, get to and from work, and walk the baby. But even here, she tried not to complain and to look at everything with a positive attitude. One day, on her way home from her morning shift, Emily hesitated at the exit and sat down at a vacant table to tie her shoelaces. Her thoughts of how hard it would be to manage even simple tasks were suddenly interrupted. Behind her, at a neighboring table, sat a man and a woman. Apparently, they had come in for lunch and were animatedly discussing things at work. I went out into the hallway today, and he's standing in the window watching. Susan told me later that he stands like that every day. Waiting for his mom to come get him, came a pleasant female voice. Doesn't he have any relatives at all? The interlocutor asked. No one, as far as I know, refusing. And there's nothing to treat him for. What don't they treat him? They help, of course, as much as they can, and the doctor comes every week from the children's polyclinic. But you understand there's always not enough money. She could not tear herself away from the chair. A conversation between two strangers and even overheard. But the story they were discussing touched her to the core. When the guests got up, she got up as well and headed after them. Just going for a walk. For interest's sake, she promised herself. The man and woman didn't notice the surveillance. They continued to discuss something until they reached a gray, unassuming building surrounded by a metal fence. A playground was visible away from the entrance. The windows on the second floor were decorated with paper flowers. What's the surprise? This was an orphanage. The small figure of a blonde-haired boy wearing a blue plaid shirt appeared in one of the windows. He looked around, as if searching for someone with his eyes. When he spotted Emily, he rose on his tiptoes and looked at her expectantly. A moment later, the curtain behind which he had been hiding moved, and a large woman in a brightly colored blouse and a carelessly curled lock of hair appeared behind him. She took him by the arm and with difficulty led him away. The boy tried to hold on and grab the windowsill. The child's strength was not enough to resist. His heart plummeted downward. The conversation of the visitors, the scene in the window, the shelter it, all came together in one picture. She rang the intercom, told the guard she was here to see the director, and, finding the right office, knocked. Did I understand you correctly? You want to pay for Peter's treatment? The headmistress asked with restrained surprise. Yes, Emily replied confidently. On the way from the gate to this office, she had calculated that she would give away some of her modest savings. Well, good. We'll be glad to have you, said the superintendent. Tell me, are you a relative of his? No, I heard about his story by chance, said Emily. Can I see the boy? Peter stood at the window again, looking among the passers-by for someone to come and get him. He was too thin and small for a 5-year-old, and Emily wanted to hug him. Peter, you have visitors, his teacher told him calmly. The child turned around, eyes as blue as his shirt, and hesitantly peered out from behind the curtain. They were sitting in some office in the presence of the very woman from the orphanage who had dined at the restaurant that day. The boy folded his hands in his lap and fiddled with a small toy. Emily scolded herself for not carrying some cute little trinket in her bag, like a keychain or a notebook. What can I get you next time I'm here? She asked goodbye. It was obvious that Peter was glad that she had decided to come again, but he didn't dare to ask for anything, and only modestly lowered his head. Will you say something in my ear? Emily asked, leaning over, and he nodded in agreement. Hey, pencils, the boy whispered. Good, she said, and hugged him gently. That evening, counting the dollars she had saved, she took a deep breath, realizing how precious every dollar would soon be to her. Still, she didn't regret her decision to help Peter. She couldn't get past his story, especially after seeing it with her own eyes. The next day, Emily, completely immersed in her thoughts, did everything on automatic. Returning to the kitchen from the locker room, where she'd gone to get a sweater, she ran into a tall man who reminded her very much of Jason. At first, she'd mistaken him for her boss. "I'm sorry," she said guiltily, smiling. "That's all right," the stranger answered her. "Do you work here?" "Yes, in the kitchen. My name is Emily. Nice to meet you." "May, I'm Kevin. Do you know where my brother Jason and your brother are?" "I think he went somewhere." "You better ask the manager," Emily suggested. He's in the lounge talking to the bartender." Kevin smiled sweetly, keeping his eyes on Emily, and went to look for David. The girl smiled back embarrassedly and then hurried into the kitchen. In a matter of weeks, the orphanage and its residents had become Emily's own. On weekends, she came to Peter's house, bringing fruit, toys, paints, felt tip pens, coloring books, and coloring books. Of course, all of this had to be shared with the other children. But in the moments when the two of them sat together in the meeting room, Peter became the sole owner of a whole wealth. Since their first meeting, the boy had grown cheerful and strong, and as before, he ran to the window where he now looked out for Emily. "I drew you a picture," he said one day, and handed her a sheet of paper. It showed a woman with long hair walking among the trees and flowers, holding the hand of a little boy in a blue shirt. In the corner was the inscription, "Emily from Peter." "Now, that's beautiful. Did you write the letters yourself?" Emily asked. "Yes," the boy answered proudly, fiddling with the design kit while Emily brushed away a tear. She'd never asked where he'd come from in the orphanage, whether he remembered his family, who he'd been waiting for looking out the window, but she wanted to know it very much. The girl went to the headmistress. "Oh, Emily, sighed the woman. "It would be all right if he were from some bad family." "What's wrong with his family?" Emily asked. "I didn't tell you that," she whispered. "He's the grandson of a local businessman. There's a restaurant not far from here. Have you seen it?" Emily nodded. "Well, they have these restaurants all over the city," continued the manageress. "And the boy here to us said." "Nay, how come?" Emily asked, dumbfounded. "I don't know," she said. "They say his eldest son and his wife divorced. She married a second time. Now he lives in luxury, and he forgot about the child. He sent gifts for a while, and then he disappeared. Peter remembers him. No, he was just a baby when he came to us. And if he's waiting for someone, we're all waiting." In the months she'd lived here, Emily had walked the entire neighborhood, so there was no doubt. There was only one restaurant in the neighborhood, and Peter was in her boss's family. The image of a wealthy, confident man of chic appearance, clearly in need of nothing, came to mind. How could he leave the child in the orphanage, forget about him, give him to the care of strangers? Her sense of injustice grew in her until it was impossible to contain it. "Dana, do you know where Timothy's father, our principal, is? Everyone talks about him with such respect," she asked as nonchalantly as possible, as if she were just curious. "I've only seen him once," Dana said. "A man like a man, short, gray-haired. He's kind of in charge of the main restaurant, and he's given his sons the branch." After finding the address of the place, Emily ran home after her shift to feed and take the baby outside. Then she drove downtown to meet Michael Alexander in person. He appeared to be a very personable and businesslike man, sitting in a leather chair behind a large, heavy desk. "What can I do for you?" he asked her courteously, looking at her carefully. "I don't know where to begin," Emily admitted and told him everything she knew, trying to be tactful and calm. Michael Alexander listened without interrupting. It was hard to tell from his face what he was thinking and how he felt about what he had heard. "So you're saying that I have a grandson?" Stretching his words after a pause, he said. "Yes," she answered confidently. "Well, good. Leave me your number. I want to know more about it. As soon as I know, I'll call you." And he called exactly 2 days later, saying that he did not know about his grandson, but now he wanted to participate in his fate. There was confusion and even sadness in his voice. "Did you really melt your grandfather's heart?" Jason asked, smiling, when Peter's story had become public. "I guess I did, didn't I?" Emily smiled back. "He wants to take him in, and he's asking me to babysit. I just don't know how I'm going to keep up with everything." "We'll leave you fewer shifts, and soon we'll send you on maternity leave," the boss said. And she thought he sounded tender in his voice and looked at her in a special way. "Emily, can I talk to you for a minute?" "Me?" Footsteps sounded behind her. It was Kyle. He was surprised to see Peter as his father had been. But contrary to his anxious expectations, he didn't get angry or pull away. On the contrary, he also decided to take part in the boy's upbringing. "Emily, you're a very kind and bright person," the man said when they were alone. "Do not think that I left my wife and son. I really didn't know about him, but it's not for me to judge," he shrugged. They were nearing the end of their 5th month of pregnancy, but they were still strong enough to go about their daily business. Peter finally waited for his happiness and looked out the window. He was taken to his grandfather's house, given a whole room, and bought a sea of toys. In the mornings, he was taken to daycare by Michael Alexander's driver, and in the afternoons, Emily came over to study and play with him. The wife of the owner was about 20 years younger than him and was more engaged in her own life, so that she was almost not visible. The baby, unexpectedly for the owners, became the favorite of the whole apartment. Neighbors, and even the dog, who at first cold to the newcomer dog, with time became sociable with him. Freedom walked along the corridor and even sometimes stayed at someone's house for the night. Emily was glad. When it was time to give birth, she would have someone to leave him with. One warm day in August, when nothing seemed to be going wrong and work at the restaurant was going on as usual, the man Kyle had been talking to Sandy with suddenly changed his face. "But come by the manager's office when you're free," he said sternly as he looked into the kitchen. Everyone who was around at that moment looked at them in surprise. "I thought he was in love with you." "Oh, don't make up nonsense," Emily retorted, pretending it was no big deal, though she wondered how she could have earned that attitude. How had he asked? She'd walked into Jason's office after work, who'd left that day, leaving his older brother in his place instead of David, his deputy. "Why are you prying into someone else's life without figuring things out?" Kyle began his interrogation abruptly. "Is something wrong?" "I don't understand. That's what I don't understand. Why meddle in another family's affairs? I have to justify myself to my father for the umpteenth time. And it's all because of you, because you stick your nose where it doesn't belong." He'd never allowed himself to talk to her like that before, and she cried with resentment, holding herself back. It turned out that Kyle had called his ex-wife Sandy last night to remind her of her son. She had reacted coldly, not wanting to hear about her past life. The woman was quite happy with the way her fate had settled after the divorce. "You say you don't want a son?" Kyle asked her, starting to boil over. "And you're up for being a good father. I'll give you a look at you, Sandy. You're a fool, maybe you are. At least I'm not abandoning my child," I'm sure she was almost laughing. "What do you mean? Have you forgotten that we've been living like strangers lately? Have you lost your memory? It is not your child, not yours, as it is not mine." "Whose is it then? It doesn't matter. And anyway, I'm sick of you. Leave me alone. Why didn't I just block your number?" Sandy was indignant, while Kyle's unpleasant realization dawned on her. David. Yes, silence followed those words, and everything suddenly made sense. Silence. Nothing to say. So live with that for the rest of your life, knowing that your sick child is in an orphanage and your lover works under your ex-husband's boss. "Kyle, don't shame me. He promised to divorce his wife and take care of me and the boy." Sandy's voice shook, but he didn't wait for her remorse and disconnected. David, the restaurant administrator, was scandalously fired. He didn't want to lose his position over some personal relationship. "Get out," Kyle pointed at the door, and the usually cheerful face of the administrator twisted with anger. "Aren't you the boss here?" he said sharply and looked at Jason with hope in his eyes. "I stand in solidarity with my brother," the principal replied tiredly. "If you have thoughts of going to your father, you can waste no time. Will you? I'm sure he's furious that he had to recognize a complete stranger's child as his grandson." After all of this wrangling, Jason went home to not see his brother or anyone at all for a while. When he heard what had happened, he couldn't believe it. Even in the morning, it had seemed like things couldn't have turned out better. She had a place to live, a job, and a very attractive and wealthy man who was paying attention to her. Peter had finally found a family, and the only thing she had to think about was how to get healthy and have a son. "Should I leave now?" she asked without raising her eyes to Kyle. Yes, still in accounting, he cut him off stiffly. After getting the money, she headed over to Peter's house to play with him and take her mind off her heavy thoughts at the same time. Karina, Kyle, and Jason's stepmother opened the door. Seemed more like their sister. "What do you want?" she asked, looking Emily over from head to toe. "I came to study with Peter. Don't come here again." Michael Alexander said not to let you in. She slammed the door right in her guest's face. For a couple minutes, Emily stood like that, looking through the brown metal doors with gold embellishments in the shape of battered plants. This was it. Life was falling apart again. After the happy months with their plans and dreams, there was once again a bleak emptiness, uncertainty, and loneliness to look for a job again, but that would hardly be easy with a belly like this. And what about Peter? What would they say to him? How will they treat him now? All week, on her way to the store to look for a part-time job, Emily would purposely pass by the orphanage. Maybe she'd see Peter in the window, but there were other little faces peering out from behind the curtains, probably waiting for someone to come for them. There wasn't, but that didn't mean he was all right. She took a walk with the baby over the weekend and had a hurried snack. Emily lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling for a long time, wondering what to do next. The baby was moving slightly inside, and it immediately gave her strength and desire to live, because she was carrying a whole person and could not give up like that. In the corner of the room was a crib, which was gradually filled with tiny things. Instead of a stroller, she bought a sling to carry the baby to the hospital or the store. Not always convenient, but there wasn't enough money for a stroller anyway. There was a knock on the door. She shuddered in surprise, clumsily got up and opened it. "There's a man here to see you," the neighbor said, and went straight to his room. Who could it be? Wasn't David out to avenge his dismissal? Who knows? Emily walked cautiously to the door and looked through the peephole. Jason was standing there. "Hi," he said guiltily when he saw his former subordinate. "Hi." Emily looked at him questioningly, trying to figure out why he was here and if it had anything to do with Peter. "I'm sorry you had to get hurt because of our family squabbles. It's nothing really," he said. Taking the baby with them, they walked outside, leaving the gray yards and heading for the park. Jason took the leash, bought them each a large ice cream cone, and generally acted very attentive and caring. Emily was relieved. It felt so peaceful and good inside all of a sudden. "Do you know how Peter is?" she asked anxiously. "I don't know. I haven't been there in a long time, but I know he's staying at his father's house." While they were walking, Peter was running around the house, fleeing from his foster grandmother. He accidentally broke her favorite vase, and the woman was beyond angry. That's not to say she was really upset about the broken dishes. Rather, she was looking for an excuse to scare him, as she hated her grandson for taking attention away from her. Her husband had become too attached to the boy. The nursery was piled to the ceiling with toys. There were at least 3 scooters and a bicycle in the hallway. On weekends in the house appeared animators in costumes of cartoon characters. And in the evenings, the grandfather liked to sit with his grandson and chat about adventures, read him fairy tales. Such a distraction from her specialty could not help but anger that was not why she had married and pretended to be a model wife, to share the pedestal of the heiress with some child. True, the news that Peter became a bully cooled the ardor of Michael Alexander, and he began to come into the nursery less and less often. But that wasn't enough for Karina. She wanted the boy to go back to the orphanage and not spoil her plans. "Are you sad about work?" Jason asked, stroking the boy's head. "No, I'm not." They sat down on the bench. "Don't worry about it, and don't think about money at all." At one point, she would have been over the moon to hear such words. But too many things were weighing on her, so it was impossible to imagine how to get out of it. "Even if you help, I'm worried about Peter. I've gone to their place several times, but they either didn't open the door for me or Karina put me out with curses and promises to call the police on us. And Peter probably thinks I betrayed him," Emily said with a sigh. "Come on, she's not that scary," Jason smiled. "If you want, I can go over there one of these days, see how things are going, and give Peter something from you." "Oh, that would be great. Go, please," Emily asked, and he nodded in agreement. "But that's not all I'm worried about," she continued. "What else?" Jason asked anxiously, looking at Emily. It suddenly dawned on her that he wasn't just here out of politeness or guilt about being fired. "I have health problems. I haven't had a checkup in a long time. I had to survive, find a job, stay in hotels. I didn't have time for that. And recently they said that I need urgent treatment so that the baby will not be harmed, and I will be able to give birth safely. And what do you need for that?" "It's just a question of money." Jason was frightened. Emily sighed. She wanted to tell him that she had only enough money to pay for 2 months' rent and groceries, not to mention medicine and vitamins. But she couldn't. "Don't ask for anything. You'll manage somehow," she said to herself, and added aloud that she was the one complaining. "Don't listen to her. Everything will be all right." Jason hugged her. Nothing in return for the endless fear and helplessness came a sense of calm and even a sense of happiness. He arrived at the communal apartment again that evening, this time with 2 bags of groceries. Jason looked pleased, as if he'd accomplished something very good, or he'd had a brilliant idea that he couldn't share yet. "This is for you," he said cheerfully. "Thank you so much," Emily brightened. "Did something happen?" "I won't tell you before I tell you, but I promise you'll like it." With that, he left, and Emily greedily went through the goodies he'd brought her. She'd been saving money lately, buying only what she needed. And here were a variety of fruits, nuts, sweets, and yogurt. And among the variety of goodies, she found an envelope with the inscription, "No refusals are accepted for medicines. We need you healthy." Emily pressed the envelope to her chest, stroking her belly. Her baby was safe. Emily would be treated, and all should be well. It seemed to be the happiest moment she'd had in a while. Jason hadn't told her his plan until the last minute, apparently afraid she'd say no. So she didn't know where he was taking her until they pulled up to Michael Alexander's house. "We're going to Peter's," she asked cautiously. "Yes, but first to my father's." "Say, would you like to take Peter in with you if you have a place to live?" "I'm not arguing, just say yes or no." "Of course I would," Emily said. She wanted to adopt Peter, but she didn't want to live off Jason. And that was exactly what he was thinking, judging by his questions. There was no way out. Overcome with self-doubt, she followed him straight to Michael Alexander's office. They came to the end of the chicly laid-back hallway, the door ajar, and a blonde head peeked out. Emily waved at Peter, and he smiled back. "We'll be in to see you soon," she said. The restaurateur was half reclining in a large armchair with a book in his hands, clearly surprised to see the uninvited guests. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" he asked in his usual polite manner. "Hi, Daddy. We need to talk," Jason said simply. "All right, I'm listening." Michael Alexander sounded displeased. He certainly didn't want to have any conversation. "We want to raise Peter on our own. You don't want him, do you?" The man grinned, lifted himself up, and threw his finger to the side. "Oh, how? Do you want?" "Yes, we sure do," Jason answered, looking into his father's eyes. Emily's heart warmed at those words. So her youngest son had grown up. "All right then, you can raise him if you want to live. Where will you be?" Michael Alexander thought, returning to his semi-reclined position and folding his hands on his stomach. "Not here, I hope," Jason said. "I'm getting ready to leave." "Then we're taking him." Peter stood tall and stepped out from behind the door, afraid he'd missed the moment when the guests left. He had decided for himself that he would check out, grab onto Emily, and never let go, because he couldn't sit alone and put up with Karen's nagging anymore, and his grandfather had almost stopped paying attention to him. "Emily, I've missed you so much," he said, hugging her as hard as he could, and then he hurried on. "Please don't leave me here. Please, please don't. I don't want to stay here anymore." "Of course I won't, Peter. Come on, pack your things and let's go. And there's a surprise waiting for you at home." The boy's eyes lit up at those words. He ran into his room and began clumsily putting his clothes into his backpack. He and Jason helped him gather the essentials and find his favorite toys. As they left the house, the company spotted Karen by her bright red, shiny car in the yard. She looked at them with disdain and smiled contentedly, realizing that the baby was no longer in her house. Peter hid behind Emily's back. As they walked past, no one noticed that Michael Alexander was watching them at that moment from the office window. He sighed and watched the car drive away until it disappeared around the corner. That evening, the surprise was not only for the boy who had long dreamed of a dog. Emily stood for a long time in the hallway of the apartment Jason had brought them to. That was the position he'd caught her in when he lifted her things out of the trunk. "What are you doing? Come on in," he said, smiling, and set the bags on the floor. From the living room came a cheerful murmur. Peter and the baby were already settling into their new accommodations and rolling around on the floor in their arms, one snickering, the other wincing. "I don't believe it," Emily muttered quietly. "Don't believe me." "Why not?" Jason got upset. "I don't," she smiled back. "I don't believe it happens like this, and that we're going to live in an apartment like this." Scared you. It's a fun apartment, like an apartment. It'll do for the first time. But for the future, of course, we need a larger one. He helped them clean up and put things away, and then he left, leaving them to settle in. In a day of joyful upheaval, Peter fell asleep immediately, and with him the baby, poking his wet red nose into the blanket. He was sleeping peacefully, not the other way around. For a long time she couldn't settle down to lie down. The days she had spent in her room with fear, contemplating the future, were imprinted in her with perpetual worry and dread. Thus, the birth of their son seemed to be an unpredictable and terrifying event, and their further existence in a small apartment with a shared bathroom and kitchen, a constant domestic discomfort. Now she wandered quietly through the stylishly furnished living room, looked into the kitchen, admired the snow-white bathroom with a large mirror and a warm floor. She looked out the window at the lights of the city at night. It was more like a dream than reality. For the first time, it seemed, in her entire life, she felt completely safe. Sleep caught up with her toward morning. Jason had paid for 3 months' rent at once. He'd helped set up the crib, brought gifts, and just visited often. At first, Emily had been haunted by the feeling that there was some intent or deception behind it all. Then came a sense of obligation to Jason. But thanks to a sincerity and kindness toward them, all of that soon passed and she was just glad for the idle. What do the doctors say? He inquired on one of his visits. All is well, they say. In November I will give birth. Son is healthy, developing perfectly, and weight is normal, said Emily. And she thought involuntarily what a good dad Jason would be. Somewhere in the back of her mind was the hope that he would love her baby and Peter as if they were his own. Oh, and guess what? While I was driving to the women's health clinic, I met Peter and his babysitter from the orphanage. What does she say? He asked politely. I didn't think it was a good idea to tell him about it after all. Oh, nothing. Glad Peter's living well now. Not that everyone there remembers him, because no one but him spent so much time at the window waiting. At that moment, a toddler in star-spangled pajamas and a scarf around his neck came running into the kitchen. And Peter, with an equally cheerful hairdo and a smeared face, ran in following. Mom, you know how he runs fast like an athlete, the boy said, panting. And, apparently coming to his senses, looked with big eyes at Emily, and then at Jason, said, what exactly? Great. Maybe we'll put him in the runner sports section. Emily smiled. She reached over, hugged him, and whispered in his ear, I love you, son. Peter brightened, took the candy from the table, and ran back into the living room, but immediately returned and cheerfully declared, I always knew it. In the light of events, the babysitter story was forgotten and no longer remembered as completely insignificant. Jason and Emily spent the rest of the evening quietly discussing the changes that had taken place in Peter's life over the past month. How he'd grown, how he'd stopped startling at night, how he'd taken responsibility for walking his favorite dog, and now these new, unfamiliar feelings, warm, joyful, overwhelming. But as soon as Jason left and all the chores were done, the thoughts returned. The babysitter they'd accidentally bumped into when they decided to walk from the hospital to the house. It had been creepy. She was such a chatterbox and would talk nonstop about everything that was going on in and out of the orphanage. We love Peter dearly, of course. It's so good that you took him in and that everything worked out for him. He is a wonderful boy, kind, responsive, whatever you ask always does. He just stands by the window. I feel sorry for him. I know he's waiting for his mom and dad, but I can't help him. The woman approached the territory, waving her grocery bags amusingly. Thank you for loving the children so much. Emily smiled. Who's your second child? A boy or a girl? Not jealous? No, I think we have enough love and attention for all of them, answered the nanny. That's good. And then there are all sorts of people. First they leave and then they come back, and the child has waited so long for her. Have you heard something? That someone had come to Peter's house before? Emily was surprised, but she thought she'd misunderstood. No, the woman mumbled. But I'm not going to keep quiet, so I'll just say it as it is. A woman came here, asking about him again. At first, she said she was a distant relative. She came to see him. She was interested in who took the child, were they to a family or just transferred to another institution. Then we got to talking. I even had time to cry. What did she say? Why did she decide to find out about her son after all these years? The unexpected news knocked Emily off her feet. Was this woman really going to take the baby away? Why would she want him? Because, like Kyle said, she lived in luxury and didn't need any children. No, who knows her, the nanny said. The man, I understand, let her down. A new wife, mother-in-law, did some nasty things. But don't worry, I didn't tell her anything. It's strictly forbidden. Well, thank you for telling me about the wife. I don't remember the details. Like she was the one who convinced her to keep the baby in the hospital, and then she fought with my father's brother all the time, tried to break him up. In general, some unpleasant woman in their family. Sighed the nanny. Oh, thank you very much again, Emily said quickly, deciding to go the other way. She needed to be alone with her thoughts. You take good care of Peter and come visit sometime. You're always welcome, Nanny said good-naturedly. Of course we will, Emily promised as they walked through the yards, past houses, playgrounds, and parking lots. Emily was determined that she would call Michael Alexander and tell him what she had learned. It felt like something unkind was lurking in his young wife. At that moment, she had no idea how fatal her call would be, upsetting him and his sons, and leaving Peter, to whom he was attached as a grandson, the elderly businessman, would be all alone. Of course, he had a staff of assistants, a driver, a gardener, a cook, a maid. And Michael Alexander had a wife, young, beautiful, slender, and spectacular. But none of these people really needed him. Everyone was only after his monetary interest. He handed over all the business affairs to Karina, and himself spent most of his time at home, sitting in his incredible size chair, drinking his favorite coffee and reading books. These cases brought him pleasure, but could not replace the simple live communication. With trembling hands, she dialed the number she had secretly written down from David's notebook long ago. Hello, came the harsh male voice. Michael Alexander, hello, it's Emily. You probably don't even want to hear from me, but there's something I really need to tell you. It's important, she said quickly, in one breath so as not to slip up. She was surprised when, instead of hanging up or saying mean things, the man seemed pleased. Hi, Emily, go ahead, he said in a measured tone. One man was very persuasive about leaving the baby in the hospital, and he also tried to quarrel you and your sons and them among themselves. This person is your wife, Karina. I don't know how to explain it to you, but I think she's dangerous to you. Please be careful. Take care of yourself. Understood, Michael Alexander said after almost a minute's silence. Thank you. Tell Jason and Peter not to take offense at me. Okay, I will. What happened next? She didn't know. Whether he listened to what she said, or whether he took it as silly fiction, or whether he told Karina about it. And they laughed together. Whatever it was, she did what she had to do. Let them deal with it themselves. She didn't dare say anything more. Emily was afraid of Jason's reaction. He hadn't liked to talk about his family since he'd been fired, and he didn't want to talk to his relatives. The news came on a most unexpected day. Since morning, she did not pull up her stomach, lying in the bathtub, but the contractions did not let go. On the contrary, little by little they intensified, although so far they were absolutely tolerable. Deciding to herself that there was enough money for the trip, she did not call the doctor and began to pack a bag to the maternity hospital. At that very moment, Jason knocked on the door, excited and pleased. You're not going to believe this, he announced loudly, taking off his jacket. My dad just called me. He was surprised. Yeah, he invited us over for a peace offering. What about his Karina? She doesn't like guests. But there is no Karina anymore, he added with a laugh. Where did she go? Emily, too, was amused by how funny Jason could be. But then a grimace of pain crossed her face, and the smile on his face changed to one of alarm. What's wrong? Does it hurt? He was frightened. I'm going to the hospital. It's time, Emily said in a snap and pointed to the clear bag on the bed. So what's up with Karina, huh? Well, screw Karina. How are you going to do it? Right now. What am I supposed to do? Don't worry, she smiled. I'll pack now and we'll go quietly. Just pick Peter up from daycare tonight, please, and tell him we'll be back soon with his brother. Jason was a little calmer now, but he still looked at her anxiously. And there was no doubt about Peter. He was in good hands for distractions on the road. Emily did ask to tell the interesting story of Karina's disappearance, though. It turned out that after that call, Michael Alexander really became suspicious, hired a private investigator, installed hidden cameras in the house, which he viewed in real time. That kind of vigilance proved to be very useful. His wife was going to poison her elderly husband and present everything as an accident. Mixed up, they say, the medicine drank what was needed. His heart couldn't take it. Dobre, Karen waved away, when her husband showed her a video where she slips a pill into the coffee. What's crazy? Michael Alexander laughed, surprised at her insolence. It's your medicine. The doctor prescribed it. I forgot. He already prescribed drops, not pills, he continued, forcing her to justify herself. They weren't on the prescription. I bought the pills. If you don't want them, don't take them. I care about you, and you're suspicious. Show me the pills. Leave me alone. You senile-old man. She screamed hysterically and ran to the kitchen to hide the medicine, but her husband beat her to it. How can you be so cruel? Emily shook her head indignantly. What did her father do? He kicked her out as usual and threatened to go to the police if she tried to hurt him or us again. Although I think we should have filed a report. This is a real assassination attempt. Emily was met in the waiting room and asked to go to the ward. As they parted, they hugged, and Jason whispered in her ear, "It's going to be okay. I love you." It was amazing how much those words affected her. It felt so warm and safe at once. The boy was born late that night, and Jason and Peter were with them in the morning. They were admiring the red face and the white bonnet. The baby opened one eye and looked at him seriously and smacked his lips softly. "Will he always be so small?" Peter asked in a whisper. "No, he will grow up quickly, learn to run, and you will play together in the cars." "You," said his mother. "I don't know what to do with such a little one," the boy exhaled. "Really?" Jason and Emily exchanged understanding looks. After they were discharged, Mikey's grandfather and uncle wanted to meet the newborn. Emily only smiled as she watched a broad-shouldered and sad Michael Alexander gently rock the baby while Kyle gave him advice on what lullaby to sing to help the baby sleep better. The family is finally reunited. A year and a half after these events, Emily began to leave her youngest son with a nanny and herself returned to the restaurant where she was now in charge of things in the kitchen. The guests loved the menu, which was updated with her participation, so there was plenty of work to do. One thing had been troubling her heart all this time, but Jason was so preoccupied with work and the children that he kept putting off a decision that was important to both of them. Finally, one day, arriving at the restaurant, as usual by 9, Emily discovered a sign at the entrance that read "Special Service." "What is that?" She wondered and walked inside to the lounge exit. A path of pink petals. Trying not to step on them, Emily stepped forward, planning to reprimand the new receptionist for not telling her in advance about the festivities, what the menu would be, how many people would be there, and what time they would be arriving, were the thoughts in her head getting confused. Maybe that was why she didn't immediately realize what was going on. The hall was decorated with fresh flowers and ribbons, and in the center stood a large cake with champagne and glasses. All the restaurant staff were crowded around it, and Michael Alexander was here, and behind them was someone else. Jason, Emily said more out of surprise than any desire to address her lover. He came out to her satisfied, happy in a suit, and with a bouquet in his hands. Only now did she remember yesterday's hints, dressing up and the suspicious need to leave early this morning. "Oh, good thing I wore a dress," Emily thought, feeling her legs and arms begin to tremble with excitement. "My sweet Emily." Jason began very formally. "We've been together for so long, but I kept putting this event off. The household, the moves, the kids. Everything seemed like the wrong time, but now I'm ready." He pulled a box out of his pocket and opened it. Inside glittered a gold ring set with many small shining diamonds. "Marry me," he smiled, and Emily glowed back, nodding, "Of course," and all the guests applauded. The next event swirled before her like a kaleidoscope. The flowers, the white dress, Peter in his first business suit, Jason's delighted face when she walked out to him, and they got into a white car decorated with gold rings. Live music, clinking glasses, the glitter of flares. Guests twirled in a dance, winking, smiling at the newlyweds, who also kept up and set the tone for the entire evening. In the midst of all this splendor, she was transported back for a moment, and a long fenced-in area, a rosary in Zoe's face. Her past appeared before her. At that moment, the closest thing to it. The first date, the elopement, the trains, the markets. Surprisingly, she'd almost forgotten that time, even though it had seemed like it was with her forever at the time. What would have happened if she hadn't decided to climb over the fence, get into the car, and drive off into the unknown with her hands dirty after work, without belongings and without money? It's scary to imagine. And how great everything turned out in the end after so many years of hardships, trials, and worries. Suddenly, the frightening images of childhood and youth blurred. Music, voices, and joyful laughter around her came back again. The smiling faces of her friends spun around. Yes, now she is where she feels good. The people she loves the most, Emily, her mom and her wife, are around. And there are still a lot of pleasant troubles ahead. Family joys, children's laughter, small gifts for holidays, joint trips to the movies, and much more. Now everything will definitely be very good. After learning that her husband had a mistress, the wife did not make a fuss, but did something different. They'd been estranged for a long time. Not anymore. Bridget went to live with her boyfriend, and they were left alone in a huge house, where each could get lost and not see the other. They didn't talk to each other for days at a time, not because they were fighting, but because they were strangers. For 22 years of life together, they never became close. On the contrary, with each passing year, they grew farther and farther apart. Of course, they could have broken up a long time ago, but something kept them apart, especially in the mornings. Ajay couldn't see Olivia sleeping. It was a good thing it was dark at night, and he couldn't see her in her sleep with her mouth open, breathing loudly, sometimes even snoring. How ugly is she when she sleeps? Ugly to the point of nausea. But when she woke up first, she was not one iota more beautiful. EJ knew in advance that when he showered, he would go into the kitchen and see her sloppy, in a hastily thrown-on robe, her hair disheveled, bunched up and tied with a rubber band, her cigarette in her hands, and a mug of coffee. Not a cup, but a mug. Can we not smoke in the kitchen? Ajay will ask again. Or he won't say anything at all, and won't even look in her direction. Where should I smoke? Olivia asks. And he won't answer her question. He just doesn't want a morning argument that will wear out his nerves and ruin his mood. Ajay had a quick breakfast and left for work. He had to be there by 8, Olivia by 9. It used to be that when Bridget lived with them, her daughter or Ajay would make breakfast. The two of them would eat breakfast together, and there would be a semblance of family. Now even that was gone. The dead house had finally died with Bridget gone. At night, Olivia made attempts to get closer to Ajay, at least physically. And there, lo and behold, she'd crawl under her husband's blanket, put her arms around him, kiss his shoulder, and try to grope his flesh. Dona Ajay brushes her hand away. Everything is calm in Baghdad. Olivia laughs angrily. You impotent wretch. You think I don't know you only get it up for your mistresses? I hate you. Let's get a divorce, Ajay once again suggests. No way. No way. You'll thank me that I didn't want to divorce you, divide the house, divide the property. And this is when we have everything. Live and be happy. Somehow there's no joy. There's nothing to be happy about, Olivia. And you need to finally realize that. I've been ready for a divorce for a long time. I don't want to fight, Ajay interrupts. I want things to be peaceful so that Bridget can. Shut up. We're going to have grandchildren any day now. And what? You and me? They'll come separately to the cramped apartments we can afford after we divide the property. I wanted to live a selfish life for myself. You were and you still are. You know, the time will come when you won't be able to stop me. Divorce is imminent. It hasn't come yet. What's keeping you? Bridget. I am. I want an amicable divorce. Bridget and Virginia, Ajay thought and smiled. If Virginia agreed, he would have divorced Olivia long ago. It was a good thing Olivia hadn't seen him smile, or there would have been a scandal. She hated it when he smiled, thinking he was thinking about his mistress. And she wasn't wrong. Not about a mistress, but about the one and only one he loved. And he didn't need any others. Virginia, hello, my love. I miss you as much as Danielle. Vacation. Freedom. Daniel's doing great. Only 1 B in English. He's going to Grandma's after tomorrow. So you're free, and I'm free. Olivia left for her mother's yesterday. Will you come over? Can you make it? Ajay wrote. Well, I don't know, Virginia smiled to herself. You know what would agree? How many years have they been dating? And she always goes to Ajay's place like it's a first date. It's about time they got used to each other for so many years. It's even time to get used to each other. But no, it's not working out for either Virginia or AJ. Virginia, I miss you. Come to my place, come on, I'll be waiting for you, said AJ. You don't have to meet me, it will attract attention. I'm tired of hiding and I don't want that. I'll meet you at 6:30 outside your office. And that's it, he insisted. Come on, you're driving me away. If I wait for you, I'll pass you by, Virginia objected. I'm not kidding, AJ. I'll walk by like I don't know you. Let's keep it simple. I have to go home after work. Don't forget, besides Daniel, I have a cat named Thomas. And he's waiting for me. I'll take a cab myself. Am I doing your bidding again? AJ laughed. Well, I guess that's the fate of some men, to wait for their sweethearts. Virginia, life is so short, and we're all waiting for something, he sighed. What are you starting, AJ? Everything has been said and decided long ago. Everything will be as it is, Virginia said. I love you. I love you. And I'll never stop telling you that, Virginia, he said. Usually men say it before, Virginia joked. You say it after. You're not the right kind of lover. I've always said it, and I'll keep saying it until you get tired of it, AJ smiled. Don't expect I won't, Virginia smiled back. He saw her smile even in the dark and kissed the corner of her lips. I'm glad I'll wake up with you in the morning. You don't realize how beautiful you are when you sleep. I've been looking at you and looking at you and looking at you. They say when you not only want to fall asleep but also wake up with that person, that's true love. Virginia, you're the one I want to wake up with every morning, AJ said. You're at it again, AJ, over and over again. Why doesn't Virginia tell Daniel you're his father? You tell him stories about a father who doesn't exist, and yet you're right there with us, and yet you're far away from us. Who needs that? Virginia, I want to be with you all the time, to take care of you every day. All women dream of that, but you don't. I can see you're worried about a difficult situation, Virginia. And you have serious concerns about how you're going to talk about it and what the repercussions will be for those around you. You know why I can't tell you now. And it's for the best, Virginia said. It's still a deception, no matter how you look at it. You think this deception is your way of keeping my marriage to Olivia alive. It's long gone. You of all people know that. Bridget's an adult with her own life. I don't see how we're going to be able to tell everyone. She asked glumly. Do you have any idea how many people we'd hurt, how many people we'd make unhappy? Olivia, her mother, Bridget, my parents, Daniel. There's no telling who else will be in this line because of the two of us. A lot of people's lives will change. And the fact that I'm sleeping with you, my best friend's husband, and she doesn't know. I'm sure she's complaining to you about how impotent I am, that I have tons of mistresses. Doesn't that change someone's life? Listening to her, you must sympathize. And she doesn't suspect a thing, Virginia continued. I wonder what you told her about Daniel's father? I told her it was a resort affair. And everyone's blind, they can't see that he looks like you. Or they don't want to see. I don't know. They do. They don't, but it's more peaceful. Can you imagine the town turning against my parents when they find out I stole my husband from my best friend who I grew up with since I was a kid? Okay, other people. But Olivia's mother is my parents' neighbor. How are they supposed to live with their houses next to each other? Virginia asked AJ. How, AJ, can you answer all my questions for me? And how do I explain to Daniel that Uncle AJ is not only Bridget's dad, but also his dad? What about us, Virginia? AJ sighed. We don't. Soon you won't need sex, and you'll start to forget about me. What's that got to do with it? Virginia wondered. You see, I'm getting older. I don't want to be with Olivia. I want to be with you. I'm going to be a boring old woman. Virginia tried to turn the conversation into a joke. I'll be nagging you, shuffling my feet. Perhaps I will sing ugly, weak because of my weak voice. Then you'll realize what a mistake you've made, said Virginia. Falling for my charms when you were young. What about Olivia? Does she smoke? Does she drink her coffee? That's the way she's always been. That's the way she'll always be. And if you don't touch her, she won't touch anyone. And I want you to touch me and grumble. And I'd hug you and smile and you'd stop grumbling, she continued. And tomorrow I'll turn you on your side, and you'd stop singing. And that you'll be ugly, I'll never believe that. You'll always be beautiful to me. All right, AJ, let's make a bet. It's almost morning. Let's do it. I love waking up first and watching you sleep. He kissed her on the temple, and she woke up, reached up and hugged him. Is that what you're doing to me? Ajay smiled and hugged Virginia. I gotta go, Virginia said, trying to get out of his embrace. Olivia is on the first bus to arrive. She told me about it. Do you think she guesses and warned me on purpose? I don't know what she knows or doesn't know. We hardly talk to her, AJ replied. We'll get there in time, he said. AJ put his arms around Virginia and drew her to that height, that flight of feeling, where not only their bodies but their souls join. And right then, just in that moment, he felt that he and Virginia were one, inseparable. And now Virginia cried out and gratefully embraced Ajay. But the brightness of the orgasm was beginning to fade from the altitude in which they had taken flight. They were returning to everyday life. And now Virginia cried out and her body tensed. But unlike before, her arms didn't wrap around his neck. They slid off his shoulders. Virginia's body shuddered, and her frightened, fixed eyes stared at AJ with a glazed look. And he suddenly realized that she was not breathing. Virginia, Virginia, shouted Ajay, and began to shake her, trying to bring her back to life. He started CPR, but nothing worked. EJ called an ambulance and tried to breathe life into Virginia until it arrived. There's an ambulance outside our gate. Do you know who to see? The first thing Olivia asked when she entered the house. EJ stood at the window and, without turning around at his wife's voice, answered. To our place. Who? Us. Olivia wondered. Over there, he nodded toward the bedroom. Virginia's in there. He turned, and Olivia saw that AJ was crying. He wiped the tears from his face with a quick motion and looked at Olivia in silence. She had never seen EJ cry before, and it struck her as much as Virginia and the EMTs in their bedroom. Without a word, Olivia opened the door with a sharp movement and saw her friend's naked body on the floor and the doctors putting some instruments into their cases. Why is she on the floor? Olivia asked, shocked. Apparently it was easier for the man to perform CPR that way, the doctor answered and added, she's dead. The cause of death will be determined by the medical examiner. We've already called there, they'll come for the body soon. She's dead, Olivia said confusedly as she came out of the bedroom. She slumped into a chair and pulled cigarettes out of her purse with a trembling hand. I know, AJ answered without turning to look at his wife. There was silence. Ajay was grateful that she wasn't interrogating him right now. He heard the coffee machine turn on. Apparently a cigarette without coffee was unusual for Olivia. Olivia noisily sipped her coffee and flapped her nose. Crying? Ajay wondered. Didn't she understand anything? Olivia was indeed crying. Turning to her, he saw her wiping away her tears and blowing her nose loudly into her handkerchief. What's going to happen now? Without looking at her husband, she asked. I have to meet Daniel tonight. He's there, at Virginia's parents. I have to tell her parents. Can you do that? I can do that. I'll let them know. Thank you. For what? Thank you for not asking me anything. We'll talk about it later. There's nothing to talk about, Olivia said. Olivia took a deep breath and said, If I've been silent all this time, it's not because I'm so stupid that I can't see what's going on. I've seen it all, and I see it all. Is Daniel your son? You don't have to answer that. I already know he's your son. But we'll talk about that later, not now. Thank you, Olivia, Ajay said. The car from the morgue arrived. Virginia's naked body was carried past Ajay and Olivia. It's over, Olivia said. She's not coming back here. Why did you say that, Olivia? Why? Ajay asked. To make you feel better. We're burying Virginia. You look like you've lost it. Her parents are elderly. We'll have to make the funeral arrangements. They'll probably want to bury her in her home village. I hope you realize no one wants all these juicy details for their own peace of mind. No one wants the truth. Not Virginia's mother, not her parents. And neither do Daniel and Bridget. And I thought it was time Daniel knew I was his father, Ajay said. Not now. The boy is 11 years old, his mother's dead, and now you're the father. Not now, Olivia objected. How do we explain that Virginia died in our house? Let's say she didn't know I'd gone to my parents' house and came to see me. She got sick, and while the ambulance was on its way. A doctor again, and a doctor when she's gone. Vika, you understand. I loved her, and I love her, Ajay said in a shaky voice. It hurt Olivia to hear it, but she wasn't going to make a scandal. She'd always been strong, and now more than ever, she needed to stand firm, not comfort her flailing husband. Stop being hysterical, Olivia said harshly. Don't you think I should be the one throwing tantrums, not you? You've always been a rock, impenetrable, indifferent. There's nothing feminine about you. Why should I love you? You're like a tank. Ajay wanted to say something, but he was stopped by a slap from Olivia. He stopped talking and stared at his wife with tears in his eyes. And then he calmed down. Keys to the apartment, Olivia demanded. Virginia, do you have keys? Olivia asked. Yes, go to the train station to pick up Bridget. Get some things for him at the apartment and come here. Will you be able to tell the baby? Ajay asked. No, I can't. How? How am I going to tell him? Olivia replied. I knew it. I'll have to go with you. Where's Mom? Daniel was surprised to see Uncle Ajay with Aunt Olivia. Come on, Daniel, let's go to the car. I'll explain everything to you, Olivia hugged the child. An unsuspecting Daniel smiled and looked at Uncle Ajay. Ajay turned away from the boy and cried. Did something happen? Daniel realized. Mommy, where's Mommy? The child asked with concern in his voice, tormenting Ajay's soul. You what? Danielle shouted. Are you what? Where's Mommy? Mommy's not here anymore, replied Olivia. What do you mean, gone? You're what? Daniel shouted. People at the train station began to pay attention to them. Mom is dead, replied Olivia and hugged Daniel. The boy pushed Olivia away and ran, but she quickly caught up with him and hugged him tightly, not allowing him to break free. She looked at Ajay reproachfully. Not everyone is as tough as you are, Olivia said to him. Why are you standing there like that? They're waiting in the car. I hope I don't have to run with you. About 10 minutes later, Ajay and Olivia returned. The boy was crying his eyes out. Olivia hugged him, pulled him close and stroked his head the whole way. Pulmonary embolism. Cardiac arrest, instant death. That was the cause of Virginia's death. She was buried, as Olivia had expected, in her home village, where she had been born and where her parents had lived. Daniel stayed with his grandparents for the rest of the summer vacation. They had taken custody of him, and from the end of August, at Olivia's insistence, Daniel would have to live in her and Ajay's house. Why would he want to change from a city school to a country school? There are teachers and kids there that Daniel is used to. As a teenager, it's stressful for a child. Olivia argued. It wasn't enough for him to be stressed by his mother's death. Aunt Mary, Uncle Bill. Well, it's not like he's going to live from strangers. Then again, you're elderly people. Can you handle it? Olivia objected. Why, Olivia, why would you need such a burden? We're his relatives, we're his guardians, said Virginia's father. It is impossible for us to move to a one-room apartment in the city in our old age. Here on Earth we have lived all our lives, and here we will die. We need to think about Daniel now, not about whose blood related to whom, Olivia said. He's not a little boy anymore. Let's ask him what he thinks about it. No, I'm just going to my class. What about it? Daniel replied, confused, realizing that was impossible. Uncle Ajay and I want you to live with us, Daniel. Then you can go to your own school and be in your own class. Can we do that? Daniel hesitated. You can and you should. But are we strangers to you? "Thank you, Aunt Olivia." Daniel smiled and hugged Olivia. "Ajay, what do you say? You're all quiet. Would Daniel be a burden to you?" Virginia's mom asked. "No, we're great friends of Daniel's," Ajay said. "I think Olivia's right. He wanted to announce to everyone that Daniel was his son. How could he be against his son? But he realized Olivia was right. Right now, we have to get past Virginia's death. The news of his paternity would be too hard on everyone." After Virginia's funeral, Ajay took a vacation and drank. He hadn't been addicted to alcohol before, but now it had become his cure for losing his beloved. Maybe it's time to stop drinking. After 2 weeks of drinking, Bridget's wife asked, "We need to fix up Daniel's room. You can drink endlessly and reach the end of the road, but it's not going to bring Virginia back. Do you need to think about your son right now?" Sobbing drunkenly, Ajay, "Daddy, you never understood me. All you ever wanted was money and nothing else. Virginia's gone and I don't want to live." "If you don't want to live, then don't live. But you have to live for others," Bridget replied. "What do you mean, don't live?" Ajay stared at her. He poured vodka into his mug and drank it in one gulp. He wrinkled his nose and asked his wife, "Are you suggesting that I kill myself? But if you don't want to live, you have to fight it, do something, catch up with your beloved." "Bridget, no insults. I understand you're going through an irreparable loss, Virginia's death, but it's wrong to vent your pain by blaming others." "You're right. I didn't take responsibility for Daniel for mercenary reasons. I sincerely want him to be surrounded by care and love, to continue to learn in a familiar environment. This is now so important for the boy after the tragedy. I realize that I cannot fully understand your pain of losing the woman you love. Love is the greatest feeling that not everyone gets to experience in life. Virginia was your guiding star, and her passing has broken your heart. But the hatred and hurtful words against me are misplaced. You and I have traveled a long road together. Yes, our marriage wasn't perfect, but our son Daniel grew up in it. This is not the time for recriminations. Let's put aside past resentments and concentrate on the most important thing, our son, who was left without a mother. He needs our support and care. I say we stop fighting and get together to fix up Daniel's room. We'll renovate, create a cozy environment to make him feel at home. We'll discuss all the details. I'll allocate the necessary funds. For Daniel's sake, let's put aside our differences and join forces. It's already hard enough for the boy. Let's not add to his worries. Together we can get through this terrible grief. That's what I suggest." Bridget questioned Olivia's intentions. "Why would you do that? I don't understand your diabolical schemes. How can you talk about anything when you're drunk? If you were sober, I could answer your questions. And when you're sober, I'll tell you about my diabolical schemes. I'll explain why I didn't give you a divorce, why I didn't chase Virginia out of my house like the last creature she was. But then I'm afraid you'll lose heart." Ajay and Virginia were weak people. Two lovebirds met, but love alone is not enough to live. The weak must lean on the strong. To what? So the strong can crush them? I hate this hatred boiling up inside me. Hate is a feeling. Maybe it can sustain you in this drunken frenzy. Olivia turned on the coffee maker and lit a cigarette. She had no problem with Daniel's upbringing. Virginia seemed to have raised him right. He'd done well in school, and his teachers had praised him. At home, to Olivia's surprise, he was accustomed to independence. Like Bridget had once been, he didn't need to be reminded to keep his room in order. He was always neat. Virginia had been a perfectionist too. If she did something, she did it to perfection. But in her personal life, she had gotten Olivia's husband, who was far from perfect. But that's exactly how he seemed to Olivia. Maybe Virginia had a different opinion of him. Love is blind or blind to many things. Olivia's eyes weren't blinded by her love for EJ, and she knew he'd never loved her. He'd adored their daughter Bridget, though, for which Olivia was grateful. And until Bridget went to live with her boyfriend, divorce was out of the question. I wonder why he'd want a divorce now, Olivia thought. I mean, she was sure of herself. No, just because she'd slept with EJ didn't mean she was going to live with him. She loved her parents very much, and as long as they were alive, she wouldn't disturb their peace with a change in her personal life. Olivia realized that Virginia's personal life consisted of more than just seeing EJ. She was aware of that, so she was outwardly calm. She wasn't throwing tantrums or jealousy scenes. She was just keeping the situation under control. Otherwise, if Olivia made her knowledge of their connection public, it would only bring her friend closer to her husband. So she played dumb and kept her balance. Of course, it wasn't easy to smile at her bitch friend and complain to her about her impotent husband, knowing that Virginia was far from impotent. Virginia didn't seem to realize that Olivia knew about her affair with EJ. So she excitedly told her friend about her love affair with Max. "Olivia, you have no idea what he's like. He loves me so much. I can't see anyone else but him. Shall I introduce you?" Olivia laughed to herself, laughing and angry at the same time. "He's married, don't hurt yourself, you fool." "But no, he won't. Can you believe his name is a J too?" "I can't imagine," Olivia replied as she continued to play her part. "Your husband? Yeah, but my AJ isn't as good as yours." "What's wrong with your AJ?" Virginia wondered. "Impotent, weak. If it wasn't for me, he'd still be in his buy more. I got him into the world. Everything he's got is because of me." "Why do you live with him?" Virginia wondered. "You talk about him like you don't love him." "Why should I love him?" "He doesn't love me either. He's got a fool like himself on the side, and they're enjoying each other. Let them enjoy each other. But I won't give him a divorce. I didn't spend so much effort on him to give him away." "Why a fool?" "Maybe she's the other one who's not a fool at all." "You don't say. If she's in love with him, she's a fool. How can you live like this without love?" "I don't understand." "It's easier," Olivia said sharply. Olivia retorted. "But what do you have to gain from your love? See each other once or twice a week? Texting? Is that what love is for? To have each other once in a while? Then it's not love, it's just a deal." "Our life is a bargain," replied Virginia. "Your husband asks you while he's got something working for him, and then you're alone as a wife. Are you alone?" "Why alone?" "I have a son, Daniel." "I have a daughter too, but she has her own adult life. And your Daniel won't be a child forever. There will be grandchildren." Virginia smiled dreamily. "And what will you give your grandchildren? One room?" "I'm not divorcing my asshole so I don't have to share with him. I want to keep everything for Bridget." "But you know, if you live by that standard, what kind of life is that? It's just an ordinary life, no worse than anyone else's." "How do you think other people live?" "Floating in the clouds. Clouds are the element of birds. We humans are earthbound, materialistic creatures. You, Virginia, think about what you're saying and leave your man. Quietly find a normal man who doesn't sing your bedtime dithyrambs but earns money." "I can't do that. I need love." That was the last conversation I had with Virginia. Where did she push her? To an ignominious death in someone else's bed. Once again, Olivia has to cover up her lowlife. All because she's strong, not a sissy. But Ajay, on the other hand, is distraught over the death of his beloved. And Olivia can't help him pull himself together, be strong. She's strong, and here she is, powerless after work. To sleep. As EJ said himself, he takes 2 or 3 shots of vodka, and on weekends he gets drunk to a semi-conscious state. "Stop drinking," Olivia urged her husband. "Daniel sees you in a bad way. Let him see what you've done to his father. You brought this on yourself, and don't open your filthy mouth about being a father. Nobody wants that, especially you." "I'm lost," Olivia, a drunken AJ, sobbed. "My Virginia's gone, and I'm gone with her. You're going to wait for me to ask the tenants out of the apartment, and I'm going to send you there too. I'm sick of looking at your drunken face and cleaning up after your drinking." "Don't clean up. I'll clean up, Olivia. Just don't move me into Virginia's apartment. I'll go crazy in there." "You will. You'll end up in a mental institution. Although you'll probably stop drinking there." "I'm done," Olivia promised a drunken Ajay. "I'm done drinking. You'll see." Promises remain promises, and Olivia continued to watch EJ drink. Bridget's entreaties didn't work on him either. "Dad, maybe it's time to get treatment for alcoholism," Bridget asked. Treatment for what? What are you, daughter and mother together? What am I, a drunk to get treatment? Ajay was getting drunk, and no one could resist it. He was tolerated at work for a long time. But after a couple of years, when they began to notice that at work he smelled of alcohol, he called his boss, asked him to write a letter of dismissal. "Daniel's son," yelled a drunken Ajay. "At least you're not giving up on me, unlike Olivia." "Uncle Ajay keeps saying I'm his son," Daniel said. "I guess he thinks because you live with us he can think of you as his son. He gets drunk and talks nonsense. The truth is, of course, he's not your father and you're not his son. Ignore what he says, Danielle." Olivia didn't understand what money Ajay was drinking on when he was out of work. Apparently he had some savings that she didn't know about, and that worried her greatly. Spending that kind of money was incredibly stupid. At the moment, their budget wasn't big enough for him to squander that much money. Sometimes she wished he would die so she could finally breathe free and not worry about anything, and she had plenty to worry about. If Daniel was known to be Ajay's son, then he would be his father's heir too, which meant she'd have to share it with him. That's why Olivia had taken Tammy into her home to, as they say, keep her finger on the pulse. Otherwise, you never know. Maybe Ajay would start traveling to the village to see Daniel's parents from the branch, and he'd let it slip that he was Daniel's father. This way, everything's in plain sight, everything's under control. He calls Daniel's son, and she explains to the boy that it's Uncle Ajay's drunken ramblings. And she's got Ajay under her watch, everything under control. Had Ajay known that Bridget wasn't his daughter, but his old friend Mike. But she liked Mike, and he liked her. Maybe that's called love. Olivia doesn't remember anything about it now, but at the time she knew that nothing good was going to happen between her and Mike. Mike was the leader, and she was his equal. Then Olivia decided to marry the docile, quiet Ajay who was graduating from college. She was glowing. You could say she'd gotten him into bed, and then presented him with her one-time pregnancy. Does that happen? Ajay wondered at the time. It was obvious he wasn't thrilled with the news, but he'd never given up on his marriage to Olivia. Not once did he doubt that Bridget was his daughter. Olivia saw that he loved Bridget more than Daniel. It was understandable. He saw her day in and day out, interacted with her, and she loved him. Sometimes it seemed to Olivia, or maybe it didn't even seem like it, that Bridget loved her father more than he loved her. It made her both happy and a little sad. But mostly, of course, it made her happy. It was a good thing Virginia was dead. No one would ever find out. AJ's getting drunker by the day, and no one listens to his drunken ramblings anymore. Well, Virginia's gone, so the secrets will remain secrets. When were Olivia and Virginia real? And there was no AJ standing between them. Olivia stupidly told her that Bridget wasn't Ajay's daughter, which she regretted. And when she found out about her husband's affair with her friend, she feared exposure. But Virginia kept quiet. Strangely enough, she didn't. Or maybe she'd just forgotten. Though it's hardly the sort of thing one forgets. But Olivia's secret was gone with her friend, and that was good for her. No, Daniel's presence was a little inconvenient. But it was such a small thing compared to what she would keep. Besides, Daniel provided for her financially the pension, the income from her mother's apartment. Her parents from the village tried to give her some money. And then, when Daniel turns 18, then let him move into his mother's apartment and live independently. By that time, Olivia hoped EJ would have already gone to heaven to his beloved, especially since he was so eager to go to her, so drunk. It's just impossible. That's all. No one to share it with. Everything will be left to her and Bridget. Aunt Olivia, I need to brush up on my English, get a tutor. Is that possible? Or I'm going to get in. A B's ruining the whole picture. I can't do it on my own. I need extra credit. As far as I know, chemistry and biology are important for college, not foreign language. How high do you think they're going? That's where they get in. Do you need the money? I don't think I'm aiming too high. Medicine is my thing. I'll do it on my own, Aunt Olivia, without the money. So you're turning me down? I don't know, of course. Maybe all the money goes to support me. Olivia was silent, wondering how she could refuse Daniel. Excuse me, I'll ask my grandparents, Daniel said, feeling awkward. Is it that there is no money for my son? Ajay intervened in the conversation. He seemed to be sleeping on the couch in the living room, where Olivia was watching TV, and under the influence of the green snake, he seemed to be sound asleep. Turns out he could hear everything. Good for you, son, for striving. You're good. There'll be money. I said it'll come. Ajay gave Olivia an angry look. Lately, Ajay had become aggressive. I guess it was the alcohol, and arguing with a tipsy Ajay was useless. What are you looking at me for? Said Ajay. Dad, don't. I'll ask my grandparents, Daniel said, realizing that he was the cause of an emerging scandal. What grandparents with a living father? And call me father, not dad. Father, that's all you are. Understand, Daniel? Father Daniel answered, confused. Calm down. We were just talking to Dania, discussing the matter. Didn't you hear me say no? Olivia said. Of course, if you have to, Dania. How many classes a week? I think 2 classes of an hour and a half. All right, go on, Danielle, we need to talk to Daddy. Thank you, Olivia. I really need this class. I told you, Ajay said to Olivia. I'm not a dad. I'm Donnie's dad. Okay, fine. Okay, Dad, Olivia winked at Daniel. As Daniel left to go to his room, EJ continued. Maxime, you demand money for Donnie's classes and you don't work for the man himself. What am I, a printing press? Have you been playing dumb? The money you get for Donnie, you don't spend it all on him. So in the time he's been living with us, I think a decent amount of my money has accumulated. And my labor doesn't count. Did you ask for it? I just don't know why. Maybe you thought you could make a profit off an orphan. Who was just yelling that he was the father. Olivia whispered. So, Daddy, get your ass up and get to work. Teach your son by example. I'll go and work. Oh, it's fresh in my mind, but I find that hard to believe. How long have you been doing nothing? On indefinite leave. You haven't counted. You're sitting on my neck and opening your mouth. You've got some nerve. I'm not sitting on your neck either. What are you drinking to? You don't know I don't take money from you. And your relatives give you money. It's a one-time job. It's time you got a regular job, Olivia said. When I have to, I will, Ajay replied. Olivia realized that the conversation wasn't going well, but it was a good thing that AJ hadn't completely drank his brains away and was still working. He drank on sprees, and between sprees he made money. He realized that his love of alcohol would not be tolerated at a regular job, so he worked at home doing term papers for students. And when there were no term papers, he earned money by technical translations. If it weren't for his nerves and alcohol, he could have tutored Daniel in English himself. But no, he couldn't. You have to be able to convey all the linguistic nuances, and that's the prerogative of a teacher, not a technical specialist. When AJ wasn't drinking, he was unbearable. His sullen look, his nagging, especially when Olivia smoked and drank coffee. Whenever he saw Olivia smoking and drinking coffee, he'd start yelling. Sometimes it got to the point where it looked like he was going to hit her. At those moments, Olivia wanted to strangle him, and she probably would have if she'd known she'd get away with it. Aunt Olivia, I'm sorry about the other day. I didn't think Daddy would react so violently. I thought he was asleep and couldn't hear. I wish I'd known. It's okay, I'm used to it, Olivia said lightly so Daniel wouldn't feel guilty. Daddy insists that you call him Daddy. It's the right thing to do. I don't know whether to argue with him or not. Danielle, you know how it ends. Well, if he wants to call me Dad, then call him Dad. What can I do about his drunken ramblings? Maybe you just don't like calling him that. That's a different matter. Then again, he's not going to let you off the hook with his obsession. On the contrary. You know I didn't know my father, and I'm glad my dad wants me to call him Dad. So I'll call him Dad. That made things easier for everyone. From then on, Daniel called AJ Dad, and oddly enough to Olivia too, but AJ tried to live up to that title. He even drank less, and when he didn't drink, he made breakfast for Daniel, as he had for Bridget, and they ate breakfast together. AJ seemed motivated to live. And the whole picture was not to Olivia's liking. She was looking forward to the end, And it turned out to be back to the beginning, and maybe soon, very soon, Daniel would find out that he was really E.J.'s son. For now, you can write it off to EJ's drunken ramblings, but how it will turn out from here on out is unknown. But apparently it was enough for AJ that Daniel called him father. For now. And then Daniel went to the academy, which didn't make Olivia very happy. She wished he'd just go back to his apartment. For so many years she'd had to endure the presence of a child, a mistress, a husband. Not everyone would agree to that. She agreed and even called herself auntie, which she regretted more than once. If Daniel hadn't been in their house, maybe by now EJ would have died of drunkenness. But on the contrary, it was as if EJ was rising from the ashes. No, he hadn't stopped drinking, of course, but it was clear that he was struggling with his illness, albeit weakly. Unwilling, weak-willed EJ fought incredibly. And his binges became less frequent and shorter in duration. He even got better and fresher. He was far from dead, Olivia thought, but there was nothing she could do about it. She couldn't poison him like she'd poisoned her husband. Danny, happy birthday, son. You're an adult now, and you're entering adulthood. AJ wept. Don't forget, no matter what happens, we are always with you and will always help you. At the festive table gathered the closest people, Virginia's mother and father, Olivia's mother Bridget, and her husband. For so many years, everyone had gotten used to AJ calling Daniel his son and Daniel AJ his father. Only Olivia won't get used to it. And it's a good thing AJ hasn't completely brain drunk and claimed his true paternity. After all, he does consider the fact that Virginia's parents are still alive and understands that Virginia wouldn't want everyone to know the truth. Honors her memory, Olivia thought. I don't know what I would do without you, Aunt Olivia, without you, Father, without all of you. Thank you for everything. But I can live on my own now. I've made up my mind. I can, Daniel said, seeing his grandmother's frightened look. I can do it. Don't worry about me so much, he smiled at his grandparents. Daniel's right, Olivia said. He's such a self-reliant young man. He came to us, and he knew how to do everything. Thanks to my mom. She taught me everything. Let's drink to Mom, in her memory. Daniel suggested it. She would be happy for me right now and proud of me. A happy memory to Virginia, everyone whispered, except Olivia. They sipped from their glasses and blotted their tears. And I, Danielle, don't agree with you, moving AJ interrupted the silence. What's stopping you from staying here? Have you been unhappy all these years? I'm fine, everyone, thank you. But as they say, it's time to get used to being on your own. You'll forget us in no time. Saddened, a tipsy AJ. Who am I supposed to make breakfast for? Who am I going to have breakfast with? Olivia, Daniel answered. AJ looked at Olivia and sighed. Danielle, let me stay with you for a week, clean up, and then I'll take in the tenants, Grandma suggested. I'm going to make repairs in the summer, on vacation, and now just to clean up. Stay, Grandma. Under your careful guidance, I'll put things in order. Are you okay, Grandpa? Permission? Grandma asked. I'll allow it. But only for a week. I need it myself. Grandma smiled, Virginia's father, and everyone laughed. When Daniel came home from class, he found his grandmother with the secretary open and a pile of papers and receipts taken out of it. What's this? Daniel asked. What is it, Daniel? Cried Grandma, raising her eyes to her grandson. Yes, Anushka, these are your old letters. Grandma. So it turns out that AJ is your real father? Daniel asked in a trembling voice. Grandma held out a thick notebook to him with a trembling hand. On the pages were entries made by his mother's hand. This is Mom's diary, Grandma said. Flip through the pages, just as it was written. It appears so, Grandma replied. It's so personal, but you have a right to know the truth, Danielle. You're a big boy. Maybe it's time for everyone to know the truth. Maybe it's not, Grandma said with doubt in her voice. What will happen to everyone when they find out? I can't imagine what will happen to Grandpa. I'm scared. What about Olivia? She raised you for so many years without knowing the truth. What do you think, Danielle? What do we do? I don't know, Grandma. I have no idea, Daniel answered. I'll read the whole diary, and then you and I will decide what to do. You look so pale. How sick are you? Do you need any medicine? I'll take a drink and calm down, and I'll call my grandfather. How he is there, I'll find out, said the grandmother, confused. So it turns out how it was. After reading his mother's diary, Daniel thought, it's not that simple. For obvious reasons, Mom didn't want this to be known. So now what? Should this secret be kept further from my grandmother and me or not? I wonder if my dad knows that my sister didn't know about it before either, judging from my mom's notes. But it's not my secret, and I don't think I should make it public. Who's going to feel better about it? Bridget, Dad, Aunt Olivia, Grandpa. After Mom died, Aunt Olivia became his second mother. It was her choice. So she didn't know that Dad and Mom loved each other and that I was really her husband's son. Because what normal woman would take in the son of her husband's mistress? So if she and Grandma reveal this truth, a lot of good people will suffer. No, we shouldn't do that. Let it go as it is. Life will sort things out. But how he wanted to tell his father the truth, that he knew about their love with his mother, how he wanted his father to know that he, Daniel, knew the truth. Couldn't it be okay to tell his father? Daniel thought. From the lines of the diary, it is clear that my father recognized me as his son. Many questions did not find an answer in Daniel's mind, and he didn't know what the right thing to do was. Between the pages of the diary, he found a photo of his mother and father together. So young and happy they were in the picture. Dad, how much I look like him. I'm just now seeing it, Daniel thought. At first glance, you'd think it was me hugging my mom. Daniel found a suitable photo frame, inserted the picture into it, and set it on his desk. He smiled at the picture of his parents and his thoughts. His mom is gone, but he has his dad, and no one can take that away from him. Grandma, how is Grandpa without you? Didn't you tell him anything? Daniel asked. He only misses me. We were never apart. And now, no, I didn't. What if I had a heart attack, and he's alone there? Grandma, go to him. There's no reason for you to stay here. You looked at me and realized that I'm quite independent. I'll manage. I understand. But my soul still hurts, sighed Grandma. Grandma, stop it. Here, sit here. Daniel sat his grandmother down at the dining table, made tea, poured it into cups, cut a loaf, took out butter, cheese, and sausage from the refrigerator. How am I doing? Smiling, he asked his grandmother. Are you coping? I'm aching for something else. What's going to happen now, Daniel? I'm talking about what you and I found out. Nothing's going to happen. You know my father knows, and I know. And I don't think anyone else needs to know. Grandpa's a heart patient, Mother. Aunt Olivia's old, and I don't think she's in good health either. And Aunt Olivia herself, what if she finds out? I feel sorry for her. Who's going to be happy or healthy, Grandma? No one. Granny sighed. You're so young, Daniel. And how wise you are. Virginia would be happy to see you. So no talking? Silent. Then Daniel agreed. And Bridget, it turns out, is not Jay's own daughter. Do you think he knows that? Danielle asked. Maybe he already knows that, Grandma. You and I better stay out of it. It's not our secret anymore. I don't think so. And I somehow doubt that I, the old me, I may not understand something, replied Grandma. You said that no one needs such truth. Explain to me, and I agree with you. If I didn't, I might tell someone I shouldn't. Daniel often went to visit his father and Olivia activities. Life and Aunt Olivia didn't like him very much. His father was always happy, even when he was working. He'd put his work aside, set the table, treat him. But Aunt Olivia smoked cigarettes and drank coffee, never sat down at the table with them, and never really kept up a conversation. She'd ask, "How are you?" and that was it. Daniel even felt uncomfortable. He'd lived in their house for so many years, everything was fine. Suddenly it's uncomfortable. Why are you so glum, Daniel? His father asked him once as he walked him out the gate of his house. Are your studies not going well? School's fine. You know, Father, when I come to see you in general, I don't feel like Aunt Olivia's happy to see me. It's as if she wants to, but she can't tell me not to come to you. I don't understand. I've lived with you for so many years. And suddenly there's such a change in her attitude toward me. It's not right for me to discuss my wife with you, son, he said. But Olivia is a moody person, and if she's in a bad mood, she's not going to hide it. And to be honest, this woman remains a mystery to me. In all the years we've been together, I've never really understood her. In short, Dad, you come to my place, Daniel suggested. I just moved into Mom's apartment. You've never been to my place. Come on over, because I don't really feel like I'm at your place. I don't really feel, Dad, I feel a little overweight. What do you think? Call me, or I might not be home without a call, Daniel said to his father. You really haven't been to my place. I'll come and see you. Nothing's changed since Virginia's gone. EJ walked around the apartment as if she'd gone out for a minute and was coming back from her memories. Tears came to Ajay's eyes. To keep Daniel from seeing them, he turned to the table and pretended to look at something there. Is this the table where you study? He wasn't exactly here, Ajay said. His heart jumped and froze. Then it pounded so loudly that even Daniel seemed to hear it. Ajay gently took the photo from the table, brought it almost close to his face, shielding the tears from his son with it, and swallowing the lump in his throat, asked, Did you know, Daniel? And how did you forget to hide the photo? Daniel was confused at first, but then thought, that's even better. At least he and his father won't have any misunderstandings. I found out when I moved here. My grandmother was cleaning and found my mom's diary. I got it from the diary. And I didn't tell you. I didn't know whether to speak or not. I mean, the truth could hurt a lot of people. You're right, son. The truth hurts a lot of people, but lies hurt even more, Ajay replied. I'm glad you know. Virginia wanted to keep it a secret for the sake of everyone's peace of mind, but as it turns out, Dad, let's go to the kitchen. I bought a cake. Would you like some tea? I have a terrible sweet tooth like Virginia. She had a sweet tooth too. Come on, we'll have tea. But there's a lot of things we need to talk about. You're an adult. You should know everything. Isn't there anything stronger than tea? Ajay asked. No, Dad, I don't drink. Please don't drink it either, Daniel asked. Ajay suddenly jumped up from his chair and hugged his son tightly. My son, he whispered. I'm sorry for everything. Dad, come on, Dad. Forgive me for what? I have nothing to forgive you for, Daniel answered, hugging his father. Yes, there is, said Ajay. Well, let's go and drink tea. You're kind like your mother. And I was not known for anger. How do you like it, son, stronger? You know I like it strong. I'm sorry I asked for alcohol, Daniel apologized. Sometimes I want to get drunk, go to sleep, and never wake up in pain again. I'm hot tea, Ajay replied. I can't live without your mom. You're the only thing keeping me afloat. But if you loved each other so much, why didn't you live together? I would have left Olivia. I never loved her. Yeah, your mom didn't want that, Ajay sighed. She thought it would hurt a lot of people. She was worried about her parents. How would they take it? Especially since they're neighbors with Olivia's mother. And you realize that now. But Grandma knows now. She found the diary and read it. But we agreed not to tell anyone. We thought the truth would make a lot of people unhappy. Especially Aunt Olivia. That's what Virginia thought, too. Ajay grinned. Olivia? Yeah, she knew all about us, knew and kept quiet. It was to her advantage, he said bitterly. Why? Daniel wondered. How can you stand it? You can't. What about me? How did she put up with me around her for so many years? I have some ideas about that. Olivia's used to being in control, which is why I think you're here. And then she realized that she could hold me back with you. She knew I wouldn't blab to Virginia's memory. You think I don't know that when I asked you to call me father, she chalked it up to my battered brain. In short, Olivia is unpredictable. Well, now your mom's journal has interfered with Olivia's plans besides me. And now you and your grandmother know about it. Who besides Olivia, at this point, is going to be made unhappy by this knowledge? Danielle asked. And Olivia's own mother? She has nothing to do with it. I feel sorry for her, Ajay replied. And Bridget? I guess you know the saying, better the bitter truth than the sweet lie. Don't follow in my footsteps, son, or I'll be in favor of. Lying is not what life is all about. And life doesn't stand still, and mine is about to end. And it turns out that I haven't really lived yet. I've lied, I've dodged and dodged. I'm living with someone I don't love. And it's for the benefit of someone, but not for myself, said EJ with a sigh. Do you think everyone should know the truth? Daniel asked. I do. Yes, everyone, AJ nodded. Can you give me Virginia's diary? At least I want to talk to her so badly. I can, of course, but you'll have to give it back. I'm afraid Aunt Olivia will see it and destroy it, Daniel replied, handing it to his father. I did, son, but promise me that when I divorce Olivia, you'll give it back to me for good, AJ asked. What are you doing? Yeah, I was going to divorce her, but she thinks it's my drunken ramblings. This time I'm going to file for divorce and property division. It's about time you took my last name and legalized my paternity. Let's formalize paternity first, change your last name, and then I'll file for divorce, he suggested. I'd be happy to have your last name, father. But there's more secrets. It's the right thing to do, Danielle. Because Olivia is an unpredictable person. She can do all sorts of things, Ajay chuckled. She's a Medea. Oh, really, Dad? Really, Olivia? No, why would you do that? Daniel got worried. Oh, son, you don't know women. They're the cause of all our troubles. And they make us weak. That's right. I'm kidding, Ajay laughed. But it's time for me to go. The cake is delicious, by the way. I'll bring cake next time I come over. Give me Mom's diary. Just wrap it up in a bag, put it in a bag, because I don't have a bag. Well, his father left, and Daniel felt light and happy. Soon he would have his father's last name. He looked at the picture of his parents and saw several bills of money next to it. His father planted it, Daniel said aloud, and smiled. Not believing his eyes, he read the note several times. Vika said Bridget is not Ajay's daughter. I thought she was joking. He even told her it wasn't April 1st and her kind of joke wouldn't fly. It's not a joke, she said. Really, that Virginia still wonders how he didn't get it. Bridget is a copy of her father, Mishka. She is a copy of her father's character. It's a little tough for a girl, but you need that nowadays. It's a time of tough people and grip and tact. My dear friend, do you think all men know who they're raising their own or other men's children? This woman knows who the child is from, and a man can either believe it or not. No, Olivia's not kidding. I don't know why she told me that. Maybe she couldn't bear to keep it to herself. No, of course not. I'm not going to tell Ajay. I don't want to hurt him. Besides, he loves Bridget. Not the kind of father who doesn't even know about his daughter. The kind of father who raised her. Ajay tensed up, his head thudding and pain echoing in his chest area. Bridget, not his daughter. No, he'd never compared her to anyone she looked or didn't look like. He was just sure she was his daughter. Anger swept over AJ. Olivia had bound him to her. He'd put up with her all his life for Bridget's sake, loved someone else, and tolerated Olivia, even when she annoyed him to the point where he wanted to strangle her. He had. Bridget was always a light in the window for him. He was distracted by his daughter and forgave Olivia her dislike for him. And she, knowing he loved Virginia, forgave his dislike for her. That was how they lived in dislike. Before he went down to the kitchen where Olivia was, he breathed deeply, letting out the anger and all the demons that were pushing him to deal with Olivia. And when he had more or less calmed down, he left the room. You ready to go? AJ asked sharply. 5 more minutes, and everything will be ready, Olivia answered. Are you hungry? Olivia looked at him, smiled, and turned away to slice bread. Ajay seemed strange to her, confused and tense at the same time. Probably work problems again, she thought and sighed. Bridget's not my daughter, Ajay said, sitting down at the table and keeping his eyes on Olivia. Olivia shuddered and tensed. Someone else might not have noticed it, but he'd learned every gesture she'd made over the years. He'd caught her off guard with his question. She didn't know whether to lie or tell the truth. Why aren't you saying anything, Olivia? I asked you a question, AJ asked calmly. He calmed the storm that was brewing inside him as he read over and over the paragraph in the diary that said he wasn't the father of his daughter. Olivia tossed the knife she'd been cutting bread with and turned sharply toward Ajay. No, he couldn't read the fear in her face. It was more like triumph. She raised her head proudly and looked up at him, smiling. Well, yes, Bridget is not yours. So now what? I'm wondering how you know that. Virginia knew and no one else knew. And you kept quiet all this time, and now you want to find out. Olivia wondered. What's the point of all this fighting now? No, I didn't. I just found out. You lied, and it ruined your life. Oh, come on, don't be so hard on yourself. Olivia snorted. Virginia had told it in her diary and revealed the secret. So now you're going to give up on Bridget? No, I'm not. I raised Bridget, so she's my daughter and my grandchildren. But when I think that I could have had a different life, a happy life with the woman I love, and because of your lies I missed her, I squeezed her out. But with the woman I love, I would have lived. Don't forget that you met your beloved thanks to me. Olivia smiled. You'd never see your beloved again. Where would you have met her? In a village you didn't even know the name of. I'm a fool. What is this? The snake was pulled out of the wilderness by a friend, the mother of her friends, Virginia. I felt sorry for her, and she returned the favor by being ungrateful. I don't want Bridget to know that I'm not her family, Olivia realized. That's all I want from you for now, and I won't. I know she loves you. Sometimes I think she loves you more than she loves me. And her kids adore you. What kind of evil am I, ruining all this? So Thomas didn't want to marry you. Are you trying to trick me? He didn't even know Bridget was his daughter. I knew even then that Thomas wouldn't make a husband or a father. He's a fickle man, not a husband. That's why I didn't tell him anything and decided to make you both husband and father. Oh, Olivia, you're so full of it. What's the point of rehashing old times, Ajay? We've lived our lives. And you were no angel, upsetting me with your friends and your antics. I raised your kid, you raised mine, and I've seen enough of your drinking. The debts are mine. What's the point of all this litigation now? As they say, you don't change horses at the crossroads. And you and I are already at an advanced age. Or is there something on your mind? Olivia turned on the coffee machine and lit a cigarette. Were we going already? Why is that smoke stinking up the place? Ajay asked unhappily. Olivia put out her cigarette, turned off the machine, and began to set the table. Olivia, I don't get it. For 8 years, Daniel had lived with us, and you treated him like a son? I respected you for it. What's different now? It's like you don't want him to come to us. When he lived here, I was more relaxed. Now it seems like he's coming for you, to take you away. Ajay laughed. Where? Nowhere. Where? Take you away from me, from our house. We didn't love each other and we don't love each other, but still. And tell me, do you believe that those who loved in their youth, after living such a long life as you and me, continue to love each other? I don't know. I haven't lived with my beloved, answered Ajay. And I know a few who have kept love, and the rest are like us, living out of habit. Again, children and grandchildren bind them. And you know what to expect from the one you live with? You're probably right. I think I'm probably right. What do you got there? Can't get enough of the good stuff? Lamb stew? Olivia replied. You're a good cook, that's for sure. Ajay moved his plate over to her. They say that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. That's not true. I didn't reach your heart with my sincerity. Well, maybe it's not too late. Maybe I will. Flirtatiously looked at her husband, Olivia. I took the joke, smiled Ajay. And I'm not joking. I do not want to spend my old age alone, even though we live without love, but habit is a serious matter. I know that you are up there, upstairs, strictly teaching your translations, that I should prepare food. Our grandchildren come and enjoy us, and we enjoy them. If all this is ruined, how can we live again? It's too late, Ajay, it's too late. And you're going to be alone. The kids have their own lives. It'll just be the two of us. Or do you think you'll meet another one like Virginia? You won't. There'll always be new people to compare her to. and she'll make the others pale in comparison. It's a long shot, Ajay. It's not the right age. Think about what I told you. Think hard. Have you noticed that we haven't really talked to each other in the last few years? Ajay asked. And today what I found out today, did what I found out today set us off on a revelation. We talked, and it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Ajay smiled. Bridget's pushing us toward each other again. Or is it just some kind of obsession? You women know how to work your magic, don't you? An hour ago, I was ready to kill you. And yesterday I wanted to divorce you, Ajay smiled. I guess the stew does have that effect on me. And now what? What now? Olivia looked at him anxiously, her hand reaching for her cigarette. Now, I don't know. I don't know anything, Ajay replied. I know. Olivia turned on the coffee machine. You don't have to break what you already have. If you promise that you won't divorce me, won't walk away from me at the sight of bread, tea, and coffee, then I'll accept you like family. And please, Ajay, stop drinking. Stop drinking. You can stop drinking. I know you're strong. Is he strong? She really thinks so? Ajay was surprised at his wife's words. She always thought he was weak. Now all of a sudden. Or is this another one of Olivia's tricks? And you stop drinking liters of coffee and smoking, said Ajay. Can I not smoke? Yes, you can. When I'm nervous, that's when I reach for a cigarette. You can drink coffee, but if you drink a little, you can't drink too much in your heart, said Ajay, smiling. Daniel knows I'm his father. He got it from Virginia's diary, Ajay said. Olivia shuddered. I'm going to give him my last name. I wanted to keep it a secret from you. But you blabbed, Ajay continued. Then everyone will know. Almost everyone knows. Then he'll claim our house. That's right. Bridget is the heiress, and Bridget is our daughter, and Daniel is our son. I don't want to lose the house. Olivia's lips quivered and she cried. I've put so much effort into it. I want to live in it until the end, until my end. I feel it as mine. And the house feels it. I've grown into it. So who's chasing you out of it? You want to divorce me? Which means if anything happens to you, Danielle's going to want a piece of it. My house would be torn apart. Olivia wouldn't stop crying. Which means I'd be torn apart. She finished one cigarette, but she should have smoked another. Her hands were shaking, her voice was breaking, and he looked at her, her shoulders were shaking. But on her tired and already not young face, and he felt incredibly sorry for her. He caught himself that in all his life he had never once pitied her. And she had never cried. Never. And now Olivia and he, Ajay, were getting weaker. Ajay realized she needed him. And he needs her. Need her, strangely enough. And not just because he suddenly felt love. Pity is stronger than love. He just realized that now. He went to her, took the cigarette from her hands, put it out and hugged her. The one he had been ready to kill an hour earlier. Don't cry, Kiran, don't cry. Everything will be all right. No one will ever kick you out of this house. We'll just make a will for each other, and if either of us dies. Anyway, is that any way you believe me? Not stopping crying, Olivia nodded affirmatively and hugged Ajay. Will you forgive me? She asked Ajay. There's nothing to forgive, Bridget. My daughter, Ajay replied. Olivia just said he was strong. She was wrong. He's weak in front of women, in front of their tears, weak. Women have a way of making men weak. How do they do it? Ajay thought, holding Olivia in his arms. That's it, I've had enough of this. I'm filing for divorce, said the wife to her husband. At these words, the husband became numb. That's it. I can't live with Nick anymore. I'm filing for divorce. Anastasia sat in her sister Nayli's kitchen and complained about her husband. I can't take it anymore. I've lived with him for 28 years, and now everything about Nick annoys me. The way he eats, the way he sleeps, the way he walks around the apartment in his slippers. I can't stand him anymore. I want to live for myself for the rest of my years. Anastasia, what will you do with the apartment? Nayli asked anxiously. I don't think it's possible to exchange it without paying extra. You can't throw Nick out on the street. He has a share in the apartment too. You'll live like neighbors in a communal apartment? How are we living now? Anastasia was indignant. After my daughter got married and moved in with her husband, Nick lives in one room and I live in the other. Only I still wash his clothes, cook his meals, clean on weekends, and he comes home from work and falls on the couch. Never once cleared a plate off the table. Do you know how much money he makes? Anastasia grinned. I'm ashamed to say. How many times have I told him, change jobs, but the only thing I've heard is, I'm fine with it, and I'm sick of carrying everything on my shoulders. Oh, I don't know what to tell you. Nayli shook her head. It's hard to live alone, too. I know how it is. When my Matthew was alive, I didn't like a lot of things about him either. And when he was gone, it was as if the light had faded. I won't be alone, Anastasia said nonchalantly. And if I don't meet another man, it's okay. Without a man, too, you can do just fine. Remember how in the movie Girls the main character said, I decided not to marry at all. One is calmer, I want lackeys. I want gingerbread. But you loved Nick once, didn't you? Nayli shook her head. Even scandalized her mother and threatened to leave home if she did not allow you to marry a colleague Titov. You didn't listen to anyone and did it your own way. You could have talked her out of it. Anastasia looked angrily at her sister. Maybe my life would have turned out differently. You're telling me. Nayli shook her head again. If you've got it in your head, no one can change your mind. It's bath time. Nayli got up from her chair. Let's have a steam. It'll get the crap out of our heads. Anastasia stood up and stretched. I need to warm up my bones, because my back has been aching lately before the bath. Anastasia went out into the yard and sat down on a bench that stood near the pamiatnik. It's a pity they sold her parents' house, she thought, looking across the street. It would be a good place to come back to. She grinned. I can't live in the country again. I was used to city life. And I needed the money. I'd just gotten a 2-room apartment. I had to furnish it. The money from the sale of my parents' house came in handy. And we spent it on a car. I wanted to please the man I loved, Anastasia grumbled, deciding to get some fresh air. Nayli came out of the anteroom. Breathe, breathe. You don't have this in the city. It's all chemistry. When I come to the city, I get a headache. How do you live there? I've lived in the country all my life and I'm not going anywhere. Call me a hillbilly. I was born here, I'll die here. Yeah, life has flown by and I haven't even lived it yet, Anastasia sighed, squinting against the bright sun. I just got married and had a daughter, and I might be a grandmother soon. Anastasia had known Nick since she was a little girl. He was best friends with her older brother Andrew. They went to school together, went swimming at the river, and raced bicycles. Benjamin always tried to follow Andrew, but he always chased him home and even swore at him. But Anastasia didn't care. She was secretly in love with Dan Titov, who seemed much older than her brother and did not even hide from anyone that he was already smoking cigarettes, although he was barely 14 years old. The sun's rays penetrated through the curtains, waking Nick from a deep sleep. He took after his father. He grumbled to his mother, Rosalie. I suppose he's going to end up with an alcoholic and a companion like Dan. Good thing Carla got rid of her husband. He'd frozen to death outside his house drunk in the winter. They found him in the morning. Anastasia paid no attention to her mother's nagging, continuing to stare at Nick with loving eyes. Except that to him she was still little, as he called her, even though she was only 2 years younger. When Andrew left for the army, Nick was taken too. Anastasia wrote letters to her brother, saying hello to Nick, and was very happy when in a return letter her brother wrote back to her saying that Nick sends his warm army greetings to you too. After graduating from the 8th grade, Anastasia decided to enter the culinary school, although her mother suggested that she go to the city and apply to the trade school. But she did not want to go far from home, because in a year were to return from the army Andrew and Nick Thompson. Nayli had married by then, moved into her husband's house, and was expecting her second child. She rarely visited her mother and sister, because she had no time to be with her own family. In the evenings, Anastasia and her mother dreamed that when Andrew returned from service he would marry Vivian. Although Vivian, who faithfully waited for him from the army all 2 years, she sometimes ran to Anastasia, bragged that she had thought up the style of the wedding dress, and white shoes, which she and her mother bought in the city department store, were already lying in the closet in a cardboard box, waiting for the celebration. When Andrew and I have a baby, Vivian said cheerfully, "You'll be his godmother. I want a son to be the firstborn." She rolled her eyes dreamily. "And then we can have a couple of girls. But the main thing is that the first must be a son." "Oh, you're dreaming." Rosalie looked affectionately at the future daughter-in-law. "It's hard to manage with 3 children." "I know myself nothing. I am strong," laughed Vivian. "And with a husband like Andrew, I can do everything." Vivian continued to dream. "He grew up caring, hardworking, and handsome. Other girls envy me that a guy like him could love me. You'd think I was ugly." "Oh, no, Rosalie shook her head. "You and my Andrew are a very good couple, and I'm very glad you're getting married. We just have to wait a few months until he comes back, and then we'll want a wedding like this. 3 days of celebration. If only my Anastasia could find a good groom. Then I'd have peace of mind for all my children," Rosalie sighed. But her mother, embarrassed, Anastasia ran off to the other room. Rosalie and Vivian laughed loudly. But the dreams were not destined to come true. A month before the end of the service, Andrew died. No one knows how it happened. Or rather, the command, of course, knew the circumstances of his death, but said only one thing: an accident. From grief, Rosalie in a flash grayed and could not believe that in a closed coffin is her son Andrew. "It's not him, not him." She wailed at the cemetery, watching the grave mound grow. "I just recently received a letter from Andrew, in which he wrote that he would soon return home." "Mom, calm down," Anastasia, clinging to her mother, trembling with all her body, begged. "Let's go to the wake. Everyone's already there." Rosalie swore after her daughter, turning to look at the fresh grave where her only son lay. Soon Nick returned from the army and, without going home, went straight to the Maryanovs. Seeing him, Rosalie splashed her hands, hugged Nick, and wept bitter tears. "You tell me that my Andrew is alive." The woman looked hopefully at Nick. "We saw you off to the service together, so you must return together. Tell me that you deceived me, brought to the coffin of another man's son." "No," Aunt Rosa. Nick shook his head. "Not deceived." He sighed heavily. "I'm sorry." Bye. Nick quickly went out into the yard, sat down on a bench, and lit a cigarette. Nick didn't notice how Anastasia silently walked over to him and sat down next to him. "Welcome back," she said quietly. But Nick shuddered with surprise. "Oh, I'm scared." He almost dropped his cigarette and smiled. "Wow, how you have grown, quite a bride has become." "How did Andrew die?" Anastasia asked quietly again, staring off into the distance. "I don't know," Nick answered hastily. "I was on leave that day, and when I returned to the unit, I was told that Andrew." He was silent again. "In short, that Andrew is no longer there, and no one explained the reasons to me. You know, the army, there is a lot of secrecy." In fact, Nick lied. He knew that his best friend died because of him, and now he was tormented by conscience. On another leave, Nick met a girl and started dating her. But she had an older brother who was strongly against it. He warned Nick that if he did not get away from Grace, he would be in big trouble. But Nick only grinned, saying that nothing would scare him. On that fateful day, Nick and Andrew walked out of the unit together to go about their business. Nick was excited about his date with Grace, and Andrew decided to buy gifts for his family. After all, he was about to be discharged soon, and he wanted to return home not empty-handed. They had barely rounded the corner of the concrete fence when they ran into a group of guys, including Grace's older brother Benjamin. He looked at Nick sternly. "I warned you to back off my sister. Well, now hold on." Benjamin swung and hit Nick with all his might, who fell to the ground. But he jumped up and came at him. A fight ensued. Andrew could not stay away and rushed to help his friend. Benjamin took a knife out of his pocket and wanted to stab Nick with it. But it so happened that the knife hit Andrew right in the heart, and he fell down. Everyone froze, not expecting such an ending. "Cops!" shouted Benjamin, and the boys scattered. Nick ran after them. He wandered around the city for a long time and returned to the unit only in the evening. There he was told that Private Andrew Martyanov was killed. There were no more details. Nick was interrogated, as it should be, because he was seen leaving the unit together with Andrew. But he, afraid that he could go to the brig, said that as soon as he and Andrew went out of the gate, they went in different directions. And he knows nothing more. Until the end of the service, Nick was afraid that the command of the unit guessed that Andrew died because of him, and even stopped going on leave. But everything went well. He was no longer summoned for interrogation. And now, looking at Anastasia, he felt ashamed of her and Aunt Rosa, that they had lost a son and a brother. "It's me," Nick got up from the bench. "If you need anything, contact me to help with the household or something else. After all, Andrew and I were best friends. I, so to speak, will help you." "Thank you." Anastasia looked at him gratefully. "And then Mom says that we are completely without male hands left. Even digging the vegetable garden is now no one." "Not a problem," Nick said. "I'll come to you tomorrow morning." But in the morning, Nick did not show up. All night he celebrated his return with his friends, and in the morning he was hungover. He went to bed and slept through the night. "So where is your assistant?" Rosa asked her youngest daughter snidely. "I guess I shouldn't have praised her yesterday that Nick would help us with everything. I'll have to go back to Jake's house again. He'll do anything for a bottle. Last time he dug our garden so hard, nothing grew. But there's no way out. I don't have any strength left. And look at you. Skinny, you can't hold a shovel." "Mom, you'll see." "Nick will come," said Anastasia, looking out the window. "He promised to help us in everything instead of Andrew." "Oh, Andrew, my darling son." Rosalie wailed. "And who did you leave us for?" Anastasia did not listen to her mother and ran out of the house. She walked along the country road and, reaching the house where the Titovs lived, looked through the fence into the yard. Aunt Carla was doing chores, and Nick was nowhere to be seen. "Something's peeking out." Helia Swan, Nick's friend, sneaked up on her. "Why don't you come inside?" "I'm not looking at anything," Anastasia replied fearfully. "I was just passing by and stopped for a moment to catch my breath." Well, well, well," laughed Helia. "And I already thought that you decided to visit some fiancé? After all, we haven't seen each other for 2 years. Probably missed you." He laughed out loud again. "It's too much." Anastasia stepped away from the fence and walked away. But she heard Helia enter the house and shouted loudly, "Nick, stop snoozing. You already have brides waiting for you at the gate." Anastasia blushed and walked even faster towards her house. She thought that Nick had forgotten his promise. And what was her surprise when, waking up in the morning, she went out into the yard and saw him in the garden with a shovel in his hands. "Come on, show me which beds to dig." He squinted against the bright sun. "Sorry, I couldn't come yesterday. I was celebrating my return from the army. You should understand." "I understand." Anastasia nodded her head. "You dig, and I have to get ready. I'm going to miss the bus." "Where are you going this early in the morning?" Nick wondered. "Are you in a hurry to go on a date?" "What date?" Anastasia laughed. "At the school, I go to class in the morning and then come home in the afternoon. I was offered a dorm room, but I turned it down. How can I leave my mom alone? I've been driving back and forth all week. Good thing it's vacation soon. I won't have to go anywhere." "Be careful," Nick grumbled. "And if anyone hurts you, tell me right away." "Oh, who needs me?" Anastasia was embarrassed, but she was glad that Nick was worried about her. From that time, Nick began to come sometimes to the Martyanovs that fence fixes, or the doors in the barn. "Mom, look, what a hard worker, Nick," said Anastasia with delight. "He's helping us like he promised." "Yes," Rosalie said. "But that hard worker always smells so bad that it's impossible to stand next to him." "So what?" Anastasia shrugged. A man can have a drink after work, can't he? Oh, Anastasia. Rosalie shook her head. You're still young, you don't understand a lot of things. If a man drinks, it's bad for the family. The wife, the children, and the rest of the family suffer. Look at our neighbors, Timofeevs. Their Pete's been drinking as long as I've known him. His wife Nancy has come to our house barefoot and with babies to escape her husband's wrath. Why doesn't Aunt Nancy divorce Pete? Anastasia asked in surprise. Why should she put up with such an attitude? Where would she go? Rosalie sighed. She's got 2 kids on her hands, and now she's pregnant with her 3rd. She has no help from anyone. Her parents are dead. She will endure her husband's antics for the rest of her life. And she loves that alcoholic. She admitted it herself. No, I couldn't do that. Anastasia shook her head. I would have filed for divorce right away. Easy to say, but hard to do. Rosalie grinned. Not every woman would decide to get a divorce. And we don't like divorced women. Even if she were a widow, there's nothing you can do, fate. But divorced women are like some kind of lepers. You can't invite them to your house. She may look back at another man's man. It's medieval, Anastasia laughed. We passed in school. I do not remember in which country, but if a husband died, they killed his wife and buried her next to him. And in another country, I don't remember which one, if an older brother died, the younger brother got his wife, Anastasia continued. And no one asked if he wanted to marry her or not. Holy, holy. Rosalie crossed herself on the icon. Such wild customs. Thank God we do not have such a thing. In the fall, Nick decided to go to the city. He got a job and now he rarely came to the village, and Anastasia became sad. Every weekend at a certain time she passed by the stop where the bus stopped, hoping to see Nick. But alas, her expectations were in vain. A year later she graduated from college and got a job in a canteen. One day she was returning from work and saw Nick walking towards her. Oh, Anastasia. Nick. He looked at her. You look different. You look so much prettier. I didn't even recognize you at first. How are you? I'm not married yet, Anastasia said, embarrassed. What about you? You haven't gotten married? I'm going to. Nick grinned. I've come to choose a bride. Pick a bride? Anastasia asked. Didn't you find one in town? No, not in the city, Nick grinned. There are too many demands. They give flowers, candy, gifts, and in general they're kind of spoiled. You have to take care of them, bring coffee in bed. Ugh. He spat on the ground. A wife should take care of a man, feed him, do his laundry, understand? Not the other way around. That's how it is in our village. The man is the master of the house, and the wife must obey him in everything. That's why I decided to choose a bride from the locals. Why do you want to get married? Anastasia was surprised, and even so urgently. Nick lit a cigarette. I now work at the factory. I live in a dormitory. And they say that families can get an apartment. So I decided to get married, to get a separate place. And then I can get a divorce. No one will take my apartment away from me. He looked Anastasia over from head to toe. By the way, would you marry me? Nick asked. You're not a spoiled girl, you're not spoiled. You won't claim my apartment. So will you marry me? Or should I give you time to think about it? No, Anastasia shook her head quickly, not believing her happiness. I'll do it. Well, that's the deal. Nick looked at his watch. We'll have a proper wedding. Or, they will start to talk in the village. Come on, get ready. And I'll tell my mother to call the guests. I'll leave the money for her for a treat. And I'll come again in a month. You and I are getting married. Well, I gotta go. I gotta go see my friends again. Tell them I've decided to say goodbye to the single life. He was walking down a dusty road. Anastasia wasn't just walking home, she was flying on wings. Mom. She ran into the house and ran to her mother. I'm getting married. Nick Titov proposed to me. And fathers. Rosalie splashed her hands. Are you crazy? No, I won't let you. I won't let you marry him to spoil your fate. He's no good for you. Don't you get it? Tears came to Anastasia's eyes. "I've loved Nick for a long time, since I was a little girl," she said. "I never dreamed I'd be his wife, and if you forbid me to marry him, I'll leave home and you'll never see me again. I'll go to town with Nick and we'll get married there anyway." "You'll be stuck with him all your life," Rosalie sighed. "He's a fool. Can't you see that?" "I love him," she said, stomping her foot. "And you can't stop me." "What can I do with you?" Rosalie sighed. "You're just like your father, just as stubborn. Don't complain later, Anastasia." "Complain about what?" Anastasia was genuinely surprised. "I'm going to have the happiest family because I'm marrying the man I love." "Love?" Rosalie grinned. "You love him, but he loves you. Why did he suddenly decide to marry you? You've never met, never courted each other. He must have something to gain." "No one's going to miss out," said Rosalie. "There's something wrong with him." "Mama, Nick is very good," said Anastasia, and twirled round her mother. "Oh, I'm so happy. I'm going to tell Vivian about the wedding. Let her envy me." "What can you do now?" Rosalie resigned herself to it. Maybe it would work out for them. The wedding in the village was merry. The tables were set in the courtyard of the Tidov's house, lavished with lavish whores, d'oeuvres, and alcohol. Anastasia sat at the head of the table next to Nick and smiled happily. And he seemed to pay no attention to his wife, only wrinkled and reluctantly kissed her when the guests shouted loudly, "Bitter." "Oh, Anastasia." Vivian, who had been a bridesmaid, moved toward her. "You're going to regret getting married. He doesn't look at you at all, as if you weren't his wife at all. He drinks moonshine with his friends and looks at other girls." "He's not used to me yet," Anastasia defended her husband. "Wait, we will live together, then he will not let me out of his sight. Until then, let him drink and have fun. It's a wedding, not a funeral." "Then let's have a drink with you." Vivian handed her a glass of champagne. "To love. And lots of kids." "Oh, come on." Anastasia waved her hand and took a sip of champagne, but it went down the wrong throat. Tears came to her eyes. "Would you say kids too? We can't think about them yet, and we have to get settled in the city first. Nick will soon get an apartment from the factory. You'll have to furnish it. You'll be a city girl." Vivian looked enviously at her friend. "You'll forget the village altogether," she said. "You know, probably even stop coming here." "Don't be silly." Anastasia was angry. "My mother is here, my sister, my nephews. How could I forget them? Nick and I will often come to help with the household chores." While Anastasia was talking to her friend, Nick got up from the table and went somewhere with friends, taking with him a bottle of moonshine. Noticing that the bride was almost crying, her mother-in-law came to her, took her by the hand and led her into the house. "Let's go and rest," said Rosalie. "You must be tired for the day. I've made a bed for you in the back room so that no one will disturb you." "What about the guests?" Anastasia looked around in confusion. Them Aunt Carla laughed. "They've already forgotten about you. As long as there is moonshine and snacks on the table, and the bride and groom are not so important. Lie down and rest." "Where's Nick?" Anastasia sat on the bed and looked sadly at her mother-in-law. "Kolka, don't wait," she sighed. "Now, probably on the river with his friends drinking. He's like his father. I, too, waited for my husband all night after the wedding feast. I sat on the bed like you. I shed bitter tears. And then I didn't live a sweet life." "Oh," she waved her hand. "What to say now? Life is lived, not Washington." She waved again and left the room. Anastasia got out of bed and walked to the window, beyond which it was already dark. She could hear drunken voices. Someone belted out a song, and the disorderly voices backed it up. "It's going to be different for me," Anastasia thought. She took off her white dress and placed it carefully on the table, then lay down on the bed, covered herself with the blanket and closed her eyes. She fell asleep immediately and woke up to someone piling on top of her. Anastasia screamed, but a wide palm covered her mouth. "What are you yelling for? Are you going to wake up the whole house?" She heard Nick's voice. "Didn't you recognize your husband?" He continued to pile on top of her. Don't. Anastasia tried to say, but she failed. Come on, Nick poked her with his breath. You're my wife now and you should know your duties. Or didn't your mother tell you anything about them? He laughed. Come on, do not break. Or I'll go find another woman for myself. There are plenty of them in the village. Who would not refuse a man's caress? Anastasia obeyed in silence. Her lip was bleeding and she prayed to God that it would all be over quickly. In the morning, the guests gathered again in the Titov's yard. Anastasia no longer sat at the table, but as hostess, she brought the treats, washed the dishes and watched Nick, who again had fun with his friends, forgetting that he had a young wife. And at night he was again pestering Anastasia, and she silently tolerated everything, only furtively wiping away her tears. A couple days later, Nick went into town for work. I gotta go, he mumbled as he put on his shirt. What about me? Anastasia looked at her husband in bewilderment. I have to pack. I have to quit my job. There's no reason for you to come with me now. I'll get an apartment, we'll get settled, and then I'll call you to me. And this. Give me your marriage license. I have to show them at work that I'm a married man now. Nick, when are you coming to pick me up? Anastasia was almost crying. We just got married. What will people say? He left his young wife at home and went to the city. But you do not listen to anyone. Nick counted the money and stuffed it into the inside pocket of his jacket. I'll settle down and take you to the city. So tell all the curious people. Let them figure out the rest. Let me at least walk you to the bus. Anastasia jumped out of bed and started to get dressed. I'll walk myself. Nick looked at her angrily. And you help my mother. Don't be lazy. Maybe I'll go to my house for a while? Anastasia suggested timidly. I don't feel comfortable living here without you. As you wish, Nick shrugged. Okay, I gotta go. The bus won't wait. He didn't kiss his wife goodbye. Nick walked out the door and walked briskly to the gate. Anastasia hoped he would turn around and wave at her. But Nick didn't even look back. She cried a little, and then gathered up all her things and went back to her mother's house. What have you done? Rosalie shook her hands when she saw her daughter. Mom, stop it, Anastasia cut her off. Nick went to the city alone to get an apartment, Anastasia said. As soon as he's settled, he'll come and get me, and we'll leave. Yeah, Rosalie said, her thin lips tightening. Words and words go here and there, but deeds go nowhere. Well, I've been married, so maybe I'm happy now. We'll live like we used to. If Nick wanted you, he'd have taken you with him instead of embarrassing you in front of people. Nick will come for me, Anastasia said, resenting her mother. And if I'm bothering you, I can go back to my mother-in-law's. It's my house there now, too. Lev already, Rosalie sighed. If you're back, we'll see. A week passed, another week, another month, and there was no word from Nick. Anastasia ran to the mailbox every day, hoping to see a letter from him. But she found nothing in the mailbox except the newspaper her mother had written. From acquaintances, she learned that Nick has already received an apartment, in which he now lives alone, and he doesn't even think of coming to the village. If that's the case, I'll go to him myself, she told her mother at breakfast. I'll get the address and then I'll go. Go. Rosalie shrugged. It doesn't seem very human. You're here and your husband's in town. I don't know what he's doing there. She put the food on her daughter's plate. Anastasia picked up a fork and picked up a piece of scrambled egg, but suddenly she turned pale and ran out into the yard, clamping her mouth shut. I see Rosalie sighed as Anastasia returned to the table. Now I guess I'll have to go into town to deal with your man. Mom, what are you talking about? Anastasia looked at her in surprise. You're pregnant, that's what. Rosalie shook her head. It's no big deal. There was no sorrow. Well, it can't be helped now. I won't let you disgrace yourself. She tied a kerchief on her head, went outside and headed for the Titov's house. Anastasia, did you fall asleep while playing six in the sun? Anastasia opened her eyes and saw Nelly holding a birch broom. No, Anastasia stretched. I remembered my life, how I had married a penny, how I had moved to the city to live with him. If it hadn't been for my mother, I would have been alone with my daughter in my arms. Our mother was a brave woman, Nayli smiled. She's remembered fondly. She never told me what she said to your Nick when she found him in town, but he came to the village like a sweetheart and took you with him. But she was very worried about you. She felt in her motherly heart that you weren't living well with your husband. How many times I told her not to tear her heart out. Did she listen to anyone? At least you didn't say anything when you came to visit, but kept quiet. What kind of husband and father would Nick make? What else could I say? Anastasia lowered her eyes. It was my own fault for not listening to my mother and marrying him. I've been tormented all my life. Now she cried out. All right, enough of this damp. Nayli rubbed her lower back. Go and collect the laundry while I make a broom for the bath. It's good for you, okay? You'll forget all your sorrows in no time when you take a broom bath. They say a broom is worth more than money in a bathhouse. Having undressed in the anteroom, Anastasia went into the steam room and squeezed her eyes shut with pleasure. It was really good and smelled of tar. She poured hot water into a basin and diluted it with cold water, pouring it generously from the ladle. Then she put the boiling water on the stone and, steaming with the broom, began to whip herself on her back and sides, saying, as her mother Rosalie had once said, gula on the back, that they may run away, gula on the legs, so that they run along the paths, gula on the shoulders so you can sleep at night. Anastasia doused herself with cool water and went into the anteroom to catch her breath. Then she went back into the steam room to wash herself properly. When she returned home after the bath, she laid down on the bed with her arms spread out. Oh, it feels so good, she said with ease, as if she had been born again. I left some compote in a cup for you on the table, said Nayli, taking the clean linen. I'll go and wash off the dirt and fatigue. Our mother used to say that scented steam not only heals the body but also the soul, not your city baths, which are of little use. While Nayli washed in the bath, Anastasia even took a nap, woken by the slamming of the front door. Rested, she made her way to her room. A flushed Nayli walked in. I'll be right back, and then we'll sit down to dinner. At dinner, the sisters drank a shot or two of moonshine, snacking on salted meat that lay appetizingly on the plate. Maybe he'll change his mind about getting a divorce. Nayli waved her hands again. What do you have to divide now? We've lived and lived. Soon you'll have grandchildren. Will there be a sense in life? It won't, Anastasia said. I'm tired, Nayli. I'm exhausted. I haven't bumped into the back of a chair. I've loved my Nick for so many years, and now suddenly I'm tired. What happened? Nothing much happened, Anastasia sighed. It's been building up for years. I'd reached the end of my patience. He quit 6 months ago, didn't he? Nayli looked at her sister in surprise. You said he'd never had a drop in his mouth. How much did he drink before that? Anastasia grinned. As long as I can remember, he drank as much as he did. As if you hadn't noticed. Nayli got up from the table and began to collect the dishes. When you married Nick, your mother and I told you he was following in his father's footsteps, but you wouldn't even listen to us. I thought he'd change with me. Anastasia looked sadly out the window. I thought that if I surrounded him with love and care, he'd forget about drinking. Only the hunchback can be fixed by the grave. Nayli said with a sneer. And your colleague will not even help. Why didn't you divorce and leave Nick right away? If life with him didn't work out, you had a place to go back to. My mom was still alive. And after she died, they didn't sell the house right away, she sighed. It was a shame to go back. And Nick loved my daughter. I couldn't deprive her of her own father. When he was sober, he was happy to take her for walks and bring her goodies. And when she went to school, he could help her with her homework. By that time, we already had a one-bedroom apartment, and we sold the house with you parents, and the money was divided. So I used the money to furnish the apartment. It's a sight to behold. I couldn't just leave it and go anywhere. It was a pity. Don't you feel sorry for your life? Nayli sat down at the table across from her sister again. I worked hard, from morning till night in the canteen to earn an extra penny. Kolya, where did they transfer your son because of his drunkenness to different laborers? He didn't last long there either. You had to carry everything on your shoulders to support your family. At least you could carry some food home from the canteen. You're right, Anastasia sighed. My older co-workers pitied me. They'd put butter in my bag, or a piece of meat, or fruit for my daughter. Nick was drinking most of his paycheck, so I had to cut back on everything. Thanks, Nelly. You helped me by sending me a sack of potatoes, onions, pickles, homemade eggs. That's how we survived. I kept hoping that Nick would improve, get a job, and we'd live like human beings. But alas, Anastasia waved her hands. All my hopes were dashed. When my daughter lived with us, Nick and I still had something in common. And when she went to college and moved to another city, that's when I realized we were strangers. Before that, it was like I didn't notice anything. It was like there was a veil over my eyes. I forgave him for scandals, drunkenness, insults, the eternal lack of money. He even tried to raise his hand against me, but I couldn't stand it. I remember I grabbed a knife from the table, which I used to cut cabbage. Anastasia continued. And how God kept me from sinning, I don't know. But Nick got scared, and from then on he only insulted me with words. You poor, poor thing. Naomi came to her sister and put her arm around her shoulders. All these years you've put up with it, and you haven't told me much. You had enough problems of your own, didn't you? Anastasia waved her hand. I buried a tyrant husband. My son started fooling around. Good thing he came to his senses in time, and I'm still here with my complaints. I put up with it. Somehow I kept hoping for the best. So what's changed? Naomi repeated her question. I've changed. Anastasia ran a hand through her hair. Since I got the other job, I've changed. I didn't notice anything before. Work, home, work. And I had the worst job in the world. I was running around like a squirrel in a wheel. I would get up early, then spend the whole day at the hot stove with smoking pots, and in the evening I could barely get home from fatigue. She'd go back to the stove. I had to cook dinner. And as I got a job in a pastry shop, which opened not far from home, and more free time appeared. And I looked at my colleagues, girls young, well-groomed, with arrows and hairstyles, and I am among them, like an old woman of 100 years. I felt ashamed. I started to earn more money and save it. I used to spend everything on groceries to feed my family better, but he got so brazen that he turned his face away from my food. He said it wasn't good. You could overdo it for your own husband. I was upset by such words and tried even harder to cook something delicious. One day I cooked a chicken, which turned out so brown with a delicious flavor. Nick, as usual, put a chicken leg on his plate and ate a little. Then he put the second one on his plate, took a little bite from different sides and pushed the plate away, saying he was full, but there was a lot of chicken meat left on the bones. When I saw that, I even cried. I always liked to eat chicken leg, but I rarely got it. I used to save it for my husband or my daughter. And I used to eat white meat, which I've hated all my life, Anastasia continued. So I started saving money, and I bought dumplings or put pasta and cutlets on the table. Nick threw the plates on the floor at first. But eventually he realized that I wasn't going to indulge him anymore. He ate every last crumb, going days without dinner. And I slowly renewed my closet, got rid of old clothes, and 3 years ago for the first time went to the sea with a colleague who went there every year. Can you imagine? Naomi, for the first time in so many years I saw the sea so warm and gentle. On vacation I enjoyed everything like a child, and I did not care that we rented some shed where there were only 2 beds with iron nets and sold mattresses. And all the amenities were in the yard. I then the whole year lived the memories of this vacation, and the next year again went to the south, having saved money for tickets. Oh, how Nick called me names before the trip. But I did not care. It was at the resort I felt like a woman, which men can still pay attention to. It was like I spread my wings and even had a little resort romance with no strings attached. Are you planning to go to your resort this year? Naomi grinned. I see you enjoyed it, didn't you? I did. Anastasia nodded her head. I liked feeling like a human being instead of a maid and a housekeeper. Well, it's time for bed. Naomi looked at her watch. I wish you were leaving tomorrow. I'd have stayed a little longer. They wouldn't understand at work, Anastasia said with a smile. The next day, Nayeli walked her sister to the bus. You should think again before you make a decision, she said, hugging Anastasia goodbye. It's easy to tear things down, but it's hard to put them back together again. Anastasia nodded silently and walked up the steps to the bus. As she entered the apartment, she nearly tripped over her scattered shoes. Was it really that hard to clean up after yourself? Anastasia grumbled, putting her husband's shoes on the shelf. Nick walked out into the hallway, glaring angrily at his wife. Have you had enough of Dan Holm? Leave me alone, Anastasia shrugged him off. You'd better help me unpack my bags. Nayeli's brought her presents, and she seems embarrassed. Is she trying to drag her own sister into her dirty business? Or did she lose her shame and show up with her boyfriend? Anastasia didn't listen to him anymore and went into the kitchen. It was the same as usual when she was away from home. The table was covered in grease stains. The sink was full of dirty dishes, breadcrumbs on the floor. It was so hard to clean up after yourself. Anastasia grumbled as she put on her apron. I didn't get married to wash dishes and scrub floors. Nick replied defiantly, that's what women are for. And what are men for? To lie on the couch and scold their wives. Anastasia was silent, gathering her courage. Let's get a divorce. We've been strangers for a long time. Why should we torture each other? Why don't we? Nick answered immediately. I have no doubt in my mind that you'll never do it. Maybe I'm sick of it too. How do you feel about me? I'll find myself a young hottie, and you'll learn how to live without a man. That's the deal, Anastasia exhaled with relief as she began to clean up. We'll split the apartment, and we'll each get our own lives. And I'll finally have an orderly kitchen, not a pigsty like this. Nick looked at his wife resentfully but said nothing. He went to his room and didn't come out until the evening, and when he got hungry, he came to the kitchen and was surprised to find that Anastasia had not cooked anything. Had you forgotten your duties? He literally burst into her room. Do I have to go hungry? Have you forgotten that you and I are getting a divorce? Anastasia didn't even look at him, continuing to flip through the magazine. Learn to live on your own. Cook your own food now. And you're going to wash your own clothes too, by the way. I'm done working for you, Anastasia said. Oh yes, I'm sorry, I forgot that you're divorcing me, Nick said ironically. Good luck. He forcefully slammed the door to the room. Anastasia heard her husband slam the refrigerator door, swearing. Then something rattled and fell, but she didn't even go out to see what he'd dropped. Anastasia went to work in the morning, and on her lunch break, she went to file the divorce papers. She filled out the necessary application, stating in it the reason didn't agree on the characters. The court clerk's office accepted her application and marked it, and said they would send her a notice by mail when she would have to appear in court for a preliminary hearing. When she got home that evening, Anastasia went into the kitchen, poured herself some tea, and made a sandwich. She didn't feel like eating. Out of habit, she pulled a pot out of the cupboard to make dinner, but then suddenly laughed and put the pot back. She went into her room, turned on the TV, lay down on her bed, and closed her eyes. On the TV, a man and a woman were first figuring out their relationship, and then vigorously declaring their love for each other. Anastasia turned off the TV, covered herself with a blanket, and fell asleep until the morning. She didn't hear Nick rattling the dishes in the kitchen, making his own dumplings, and even washing his own plate, which had never happened before. 2 weeks later, Anastasia handed him a subpoena she'd pulled out of the mailbox. What's this? Nick stared at it, looking at the paper. A summons. Anastasia shrugged. We have to appear in court the day after tomorrow. We're going to go to court the day after tomorrow to get a divorce. What, he yelled. You weren't kidding, were you? No, the wife replied calmly. And I also chose a few options for the exchange of our apartment. We'll have to pay extra, of course, but we can live separately. I'm not going anywhere. Nick threw aside the summons. I thought you were joking to scare me. So you're serious about breaking up with me? Nick asked. We lived together for so many years. We raised our daughter, and now you've decided to start a new life. I knew you'd found a man. You're a fool, Nick. Anastasia sighed. Do you have only one thing on your mind? That I'm cheating on you? Are you judging me by yourself? I'll divorce you even if you don't show up in court. We have an adult daughter and no other children. So you and I will be divorced like sweethearts. Nick looked pitifully at his wife. What are you thinking? We had a good life. Yes, I hurt you a little, but you forgive me, and we'll live like before. We're not in our 20s. We don't know how many years we have left. What do we have to share in our old age? What good things have I seen with you? Anastasia turned to Nick. Other people are vacationing together at resorts, shopping together. Husbands help their wives with chores. Where have you and I traveled together besides the village? We've never been anywhere else. You've never taken me to a restaurant or a cafe. You've never given me a single flower in our whole life together. And I've never seen a present from you on my birthday or New Year's Eve. You've only given me scandals on those days. Probably on purpose, so I wouldn't think about presents and flowers. When my sister and I sold my parents' house, I wanted to buy a fur coat with the proceeds. I bought you a car because you've been wanting one for a long time. Even though it's old, it's your own. You call that a normal life? Amelia, I'll make it up to you, Nick babbled. I'll shower you with flowers. You've come to your senses, Anastasia grinned. And he called her Amelia. It's always Anastasia and Anastasia. No, Nick, it's too late. I don't love you anymore. I used to, but now I don't. Nick lowered his head, turned around, and went to his room. After returning from court, Nick went back into his room and sat on the couch with his arms around his head. He remembered the judge's words over and over again. I give you 2 months to reconcile. If at the second hearing you, the defendant, still do not agree to the divorce, you may be divorced without your consent. For the second time in his life, Nick was very scared. The first time was a long time ago, back in the army, when Andrew had been killed and the investigation into the case had begun. But now, when Anastasia decided to break up with him, there in court, Nick looked at his wife with different eyes. He suddenly saw the tired expression on her face, the cross lines on her forehead, the drooping corners of her lips, and he felt unbearably sorry for Anastasia. There was no one closer to him. He suddenly wanted to hug his wife, to hold her close, to confess his love to her for the first time. And he also realized that he would be lost without his ear, sink to the bottom, get drunk and die under some fence. All these years she had taken care of him, nursed him back to health after another binge. Yes, she'd swear, yell, get angry, but she'd never leave him in the lurch. And Rosa's daughter? How will she react to her parents' divorce? Will she want to stay in touch with her father? Something had to be done. Nick got up from the couch and went to the window. But what? Would Anastasia believe his sincere remorse and take back the statement? The next day, when Anastasia got off work, she was surprised to see Nick standing by the car. What are you doing here? She asked, walking up to him. Did something happen? 3. I was driving by and decided to pick you up to take you home. He was obviously embarrassed. Maybe I need to stop at a store or something. You tell me. You don't have to carry all the heavy stuff yourself. You used to ignore the heavy grocery bags I used to bring home, and then my arms would get sore. Anastasia grinned. Okay, let's go home. I've been on my feet all day. Yeah, and she opened the front door and saw a small bouquet of flowers on the seat. Who were these for? Anastasia wondered again. What's the occasion? They're for you. Nick was a little offended. You said I never gave flowers. I decided to buy some, and you're not happy again. Oh, it's too late for that. Anastasia sighed, sitting down on the seat. Still with you, even if you pick me up every day after work. I need to give flowers. Nick didn't say anything, turned the key in the ignition, and slowly pulled away. Anastasia sat next to him, holding a bouquet of flowers, and smiled. The next day in the evening, Rosa's daughter walked in on them. Dad, Mom, I have some news for you, she said, sitting down in her chair. I don't know whether it will make you happy or sad. We have news for you too, Anastasia said seriously, and Nick looked at her reproachfully. Come on, tell us what's happened to you. Well, laughed Rose, you're going to be grandparents soon. Really? Anastasia came up to her daughter and hugged her. I'm so happy. Nick, do you hear me? She turned to her husband. We're going to be grandparents. Will we have a grandson or granddaughter? I don't know, Rose shrugged. We haven't had an ultrasound yet. It's scheduled for next week. Then we'll know the sex of the baby. What's your news? Nick looked pleadingly at Anastasia, and she answered with a wave of her hand. It's nothing much. I'd forgotten about it. When Rose left, Nick approached his wife. So we have lived to grandchildren. He put his arm around her shoulders. You know, I was thinking about the fishing trips we used to take when Rose was a teenager. Why don't we go to the lake this weekend? I'll fish, and you can relax in the fresh air, buy some meat, barbecue. Why? Anastasia jumped at the idea. All right, let's go. I'll make sandwiches, and we'll get some tea in a thermos, Anastasia said. I want to wander around the grove near the lake and listen to the birds singing. So we'll go on Saturday, said Nick. I'll get my fishing rods ready. I think I saw them in the pantry. It's been a long time since I've been fishing. Nick was worried that Anastasia would change her mind about going with him. But on Saturday, she woke up early and got ready for the trip. When Nick came out of his room, she had everything ready, sandwiches and tea in a thermos. She even fried cutlets, boiled eggs and sausages. Out in nature, you always work up an appetite. The fish have already waited for you, and you still sleep and sleep. She teased her husband. We'll be left without a catch. We won't. Nick grumbled good-naturedly and began to dress quickly. It took them about 40 minutes to get to the lake. All the way they were silent, there was nothing to talk about. While Nick was sorting out the rods and other gear, Anastasia spread a blanket on the grass, laid out the food, and called her husband to breakfast. They ate in silence, listening to the grasshoppers chirping and the bees buzzing nearby. I'm going fishing, Nick said, rising from the blanket and heading for the lake, while Anastasia put the groceries back in her bag. After standing beside her husband for a while, she walked toward the grove. How good it felt. She spread her arms. What grace. They walked back in silence, listening to music on the radio. Shall I fry some fish? Nick asked, satisfied. I'll clean and fry it myself. Where would I go? Replied Anastasia, getting out of the car. We'll boil some more potatoes. We'll have a proper dinner. After dinner, Anastasia sat in her room watching TV. Suddenly she heard a phrase that made her think, always give people a second chance, but never a third. Could it really be that Nick will change now, Anastasia thought. She walked over to the window. He's been courting me, even giving me flowers. And how can I tell my daughter about the divorce? Now, when she's expecting a baby. It's a shame to part with the apartment. So much work has gone into it. It's a lot of work, Anastasia thought. And what's to hide? I still love Nick, even though of course he doesn't deserve it. But as they say, love is evil, you'll fall in love. She moved away from the window and lay down on the bed. In the morning, entering the kitchen, Anastasia saw her husband standing at the stove, cooking something. Oh, you're awake? He was happy, sitting down at the table. I fried some eggs. True, a little burned. If you want, I'll quickly make new ones. No, Anastasia waved her hands. It's fine, it's even better. Nick sat down across from her. How about you and I go to the movies or take a walk in the park? The last time we were there was about 5 or 6 years ago. Do you remember? Yeah, Anastasia nodded. You went on all the rides, even though you were hungover that day. And after you got out of the centrifuge, you fell on the grass and lay there for half an hour. I thought you were about to die. I even wanted to call an ambulance. Yeah, I did, Nick grinned. Oh, how much time I missed because of drinking. And how could you put up with me all this time? I was wondering the same thing. Anastasia got up from the table. Why didn't you think of that before? I was a fool, Nick looked at her guiltily. Listen, maybe you'll change your mind about the divorce. How many years have we been together? We'll be grandparents soon. What do we have to share? Old age is around the corner. It's better to face it together than alone. And I'll be lost without you. He sighed heavily. I did not sleep all night today, all thought. I love you, Anastasia. Believe it or not, I can't imagine life without you. Sure, I behaved like an asshole to you. But we had some good times when Rose was born, and I used to get up at night so you'd get some sleep. Remember when we used to redecorate and pick out wallpaper together? Anastasia said. Oddly enough, we liked the same ones. Do you remember when we went to the village for your niece's wedding? And you and I had no place to sleep because there were so many guests, so we climbed into the hayloft? Come on, she said indignantly. You've got something to bring up. I decided to go shopping today, to look at the baby's dowry. Before you know it, he'll be born. So maybe I should come with you, Nick suggested with obvious reluctance. He didn't like shopping. You should fix the faucet in the kitchen. And the shelf in the bathroom is about to fall down, Anastasia said, grabbed her bag and went out into the hallway. I'll do it, Nick fussed. Just hurry back. Anastasia walked down the street, shaking off the bright sun. Young mothers came across her, rolling strollers with sleeping babies in front of them. Soon Rose will be strolling down the alley like that, she smiled. And maybe I'll walk with the baby too, remembering how I used to walk with my daughter. She stopped to admire the little kids playing in the sandbox. They were so funny, they were enthusiastically making sandpits. Roman, it's time to go home. She heard a man's voice nearby. Let's go, or grandmother will scold. Right away, Grandpa. A boy about 4 years old climbed out of the sandbox and headed toward a man standing not far from Anastasia. Grandpa? Grandma, she smiled, listening to the sound of those words. How time flies. It was only recently that we ourselves were running barefoot through the village, swimming in the pond, making plans for the future. And very soon I'll be a grandmother. Maybe Nick's right, we shouldn't get divorced, Anastasia wondered. He really would be lost without me. Nick hasn't been looking well lately. He's in pain, he won't tell me, but he keeps grabbing his right side, and he's been complaining of high blood pressure. I'd never forgive myself if something happened to him. I'll take my statement out of the courtroom tomorrow, Anastasia decided. But I won't tell Nick anything about it. Let him think I'm still determined. Maybe we really can have the human life I once dreamed of. She sighed with relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders, and strode lightly toward the children's store. And the next day in the evening, Rose and her husband Helium came to visit her mother and father and told them that a girl would be born, whom they decided to name Annie. Time passed, and Nick anxiously awaited the second summons. When he and Anastasia could be divorced for good, he didn't know that his wife had taken out a petition for dissolution of marriage, so there was nothing to fear. Anastasia, I've been thinking, he told his wife. Why don't we go on a vacation? You and I have never been anywhere together. And where will we get the money from? Anastasia looked at him in surprise. It's not cheap. Well, I've put some money aside. He pulled some money out of his pocket. I'll get my vacation money, and if I need it, I'll borrow it from someone. We'll go wild. I found out it's cheaper, and we can find a place to stay on the spot. Do you agree? I don't know, Anastasia said uncertainly. You should think about your health. You've been complaining about stomachaches and nausea lately. When we get back from vacation, I'll go to the doctor, Nick promised. Or maybe I just need a vacation, and then everything will be fine. Shall we go? Let's go, Anastasia waved her hand. We don't know when we'll get away next time. When my granddaughter is born, I won't have time to travel. I'll have to help my parents. That's great, rejoiced Nick. But I have a favor to ask you. He was silent for a while. Let's go on vacation by plane. I realize that it's expensive, but I'm embarrassed to admit. I've never been on an airplane, and I'd really like to try it, Nick said. I've only flown once, the year before last, and I'm afraid to go again. Anastasia looked at her husband with fear. Do not be afraid of anything, Nick reassured her. I will hold your hand the whole flight. At the airport, they were a little confused, not knowing which way to go, until they heard the announcer's voice inviting them to check in for their flight at counter number 4. Once seated, Nick immediately fastened his seatbelt and stared out the window, waiting for the plane to start moving. The flight was only supposed to last a couple hours, but Nick was gripped with panic from the first few minutes and his hands began to shake. He gripped the arms of the seat and closed his eyes. Feeling the plane begin to gain altitude, Nick opened one eye. He looked out the porthole and saw that they were flying above the clouds, and now he was overcome with a feeling of elation. The airplane had gained altitude. The passengers became animated, and some even began to unbuckle their seatbelts and get up from their seats to go to the restroom. Nick was still sitting in his seat, looking around curiously. The food arrived, and he was again surprised to find that the airplane had food. After lunch, he began to fall asleep. He closed his eyes and fell asleep. Nick woke up only when a pretty stewardess announced landing. The plane began to descend. Again, there was an amplified noise. Nick grabbed Anastasia's hand, who laughed. Well, who promised to hold whose hand? The plane landed safely, and Nick breathed a sigh of relief. It's a good thing we'll be traveling back by train. Nick and Anastasia settled in a private house in a room that barely fit the two of them. Every day they went to the beach, swimming in the warm sea, sunbathing on the hot sand, and in the evening they wandered the streets, listening to the music coming from the sidewalk cafes. Anastasia noticed that despite the vacation, her husband was somehow sad, and one day she asked him about it. "You see, Anastasia," Nick replied, "I've just realized that I've lived most of my life for nothing. I could have seen the whole world with you. But instead, I've prioritized the bottle, forgetting about everything in the world about you. I only cared about my drinking buddies, who were not really my friends at all." It's good that you realize that. Anastasia gently stroked her husband's arm. "You and I have everything ahead of us now. We will work, save money for new trips. And maybe we'll buy a cottage? After all, when the granddaughter is born, she will need fresh air." Yeah, Nick seized on the idea. "I'll build a gazebo, we'll drink tea and talk in the evenings. And we'll put a bathhouse and a swimming pool next to it. I've seen inflatable ones for sale at the store." "Oh, we'll live with you. Just take this divorce papers with you. Or we'll have to remarry again." "Hadn't you noticed that the deadline had passed and no summonses had come?" Anastasia grinned. "I thought you had figured it out a long time ago." "Were you thinking about divorcing me?" Nick jumped up happily from the bench, sighing and clutching his right side. "That's it. When we get home, we'll go straight to the doctor." Anastasia helped her husband back to the bench. "In case you have something serious, and the main thing is to start treatment in time." A couple of days later, they returned from vacation, and Anastasia made an appointment for her husband to see a general practitioner. An elderly man in a white coat listened to Nick attentively and gave him a referral for tests. On his second visit to the therapist, Nick received a referral for an ultrasound of the abdominal cavity and additional biochemical tests. "Doctor, what do you think my husband has?" Anastasia asked with concern. "It's too early to say." The therapist scrutinized Nick's tests. "But I can assume that your husband has cirrhosis, given his previous lifestyle, and the symptoms confirm it." "Now you have to prepare for my funeral," Nick said irritably, when they left the clinic. "Don't be sad for long, you're buried. Get married right away." "Why should you live alone?" Nick said with a bitter grin. Anastasia did not answer anything, understanding the mood of her husband. "Coffin me, choose me, inexpensive. There is nothing to spend, anyway we'll rot in the ground. And don't you dare dress me up in a suit. I can't stand these jackets and ties. Put me in a blue shirt and a gray sweater, my favorite. Then I'll look so handsome for sure." "Stop talking nonsense." Anastasia couldn't take it anymore. "Why are you burying yourself alive? We'll treat it as the doctor says. If necessary, we'll agree to surgery. And you'll be as good as new. And when the time comes, you'll die your own death. But that won't be for a while. Maybe I should go to church, do some penance." Nick suddenly suggested it. "God will absolve me of my sins. Maybe I'll get better." "How many sins do you have?" Anastasia asked wryly. "I think I know all your sins. Maybe you're hiding something else from me." "I have one big sin," Nick lowered his head. "But I can't tell you about it yet. I'll confess it when the time comes. Or maybe I'll take this secret with me to the grave." While they waited for the results of additional tests, Anastasia watched her husband. His appetite was gone, his sleep was disturbed, and he became nervous and irritable. As before, he was angry with his wife and dissatisfied with everything. "Maybe I shouldn't have taken the application." Anastasia thought. We would have been divorced by now, and I wouldn't have heard those angry words. When it was time to go to the hospital again, Nick flatly refused. Go on your own, he said sharply to his wife. It was you who forced me to take stupid tests and examinations. I had nothing else to do. I had to go to the clinic alone. Anastasia knocked on the door and cautiously looked into the doctor's office. Ah, Titova recognized. Well, come in, said the doctor. I've come alone. Anastasia crossed the threshold. My husband isn't feeling well. Well, tell me how things are going. The doctor paced the room. Perhaps it's better that you came alone, he said, stopping in front of Anastasia. I have nothing to comfort you. The tests show that your husband has terminal liver cancer that has metastasized to other organs. Is it incurable? Anastasia asked the question and realized the stupidity of it. Couldn't we do surgery or something else? Could chemotherapy be administered? The doctor thought for a moment. You could try. But I don't think it would help anymore. Although, you need to take some more tests to be sure that your body can withstand chemotherapy. Here's a referral to an oncologist for tests. He'll explain everything you need to do next. Anastasia walked home slowly, tears in her eyes and the doctor's voice in her ears, 3 to 6 months. When she returned, she walked into Nick's room and saw him sleeping with his legs tucked under him. Maybe it will still turn out okay, she watched her husband's face. As if he sensed her gaze, he opened his eyes. Seeing his wife, with difficulty he got up and sat down on the sofa. How has he lost weight? Anastasia thought. Only recently we went to a resort. He looked good, even had a little tummy. Now it's so that all his clothes are hanging out. What did your doctor say? Nick asked with a grin. You'll live, Anastasia answered hastily. I just need to take some tests for treatment. We'll go with you tomorrow. I'm not going anywhere, Nick shook his head. I'll live as long as fate gives me. I don't need to poison my body with chemistry. How did he know about the chemo? Does he really know he has cancer? Anastasia was scared. You'll get better if you follow the doctor's recommendations, she insisted. You still have to get treatment. I won't, Nick repeated capriciously. Drink your own pills, maybe it's better for you. Maybe you'll become calmer and they'll let you go. Become as you wish, Anastasia said tiredly. I can't change your mind. The next day, Anastasia went to the oncologist and told him that her husband, Nick, didn't want to take any medication. And she hadn't even told him about the chemotherapy. I'll tell you what the doctor said when asked if Nick had any chance of recovery. A lot in treatment depends on the patient himself, on his willpower and will to live. Sometimes hopelessly ill patients literally cling to life and live for another 10 years, and the other may die of a cold or cut his finger. If your husband does not want to fight, then medicine is powerless here. So just be close to your husband, help him. Support him with painkillers, which I will now prescribe you. That's all you can do to help him. Once again, after leaving the hospital, Anastasia walked slowly down the street and couldn't believe that Nick might be leaving this world very soon. The phone rang and she saw on the display that it was her daughter calling. Mommy, how are you and Daddy doing? She asked cheerfully. Helium and I want to come over and visit you today. Oh, Rose, how can you show up? Anastasia tried to answer. Daddy's a little sick. Don't worry, it's nothing. He got a virus somewhere. I'm afraid I might catch it from him. When he gets better, we'll come to you. You need to take care now. You're about to give birth, so you mustn't get sick. Anastasia said goodbye to her daughter. She walked slowly down the street again. She didn't want to tell Rose that her father was seriously ill. When she had the baby, then she would know everything. In the meantime, let her remain in ignorance. Her husband's temper had changed for the worse again. He became cranky, angry, irritable again. When he was in pain, he would throw a pillow at Anastasia as if she were to blame for his suffering. Anastasia put up with his antics, making liquid porridge and spoon-feeding him. When he stopped rising from the couch, she massaged him to avoid bed sores and changed his underwear. Nick grew weaker every day. He could no longer turn over on his own. His speech became slow and at times slurred. He moaned and gritted his teeth in pain. and in his delirium he kept saying, "Andrew, take me away, Andrew." 3 days before Nick died, Rose gave birth to a daughter, and Anastasia, sitting beside her husband, through her tears, said, "Well, you've lived to see your granddaughter. Now get well. Annie needs a grandfather. You'll tell her stories and ride her on your back." But Nick didn't understand anything anymore. And just before he died, he looked at Anastasia with clear eyes and slowly said, "God punished me for Andrew. He was killed because of me. I should have been in his place." "What are you saying?" Anastasia screamed. But Nick didn't hear her anymore. After Nick's funeral, Anastasia was afraid to go into the empty apartment, where no one was waiting for her. In the evening, she wandered the streets for long periods of time, pondering her husband's last words, that her brother Andrew had died because of him. Now she would never know how it had really happened. And did she really need to know? After all, it had been so many years. On weekends, Anastasia visited her daughter and son-in-law to babysit Annie's granddaughter. Rose at first reproached her mother for hiding her father's illness from her. But Anastasia managed to convince her that pregnant women do not need negative emotions to bear a healthy child. After the death of her husband, life for Anastasia seemed to stop. Only her granddaughter, who had recently been born, gave her meaning. She blamed herself for once deciding to file for divorce from Nick. Maybe that was the reason for the rapid development of his illness due to mental distress. Although, as the doctor claimed, the development of the tumor began 2 years ago and was mostly asymptomatic. As time passed, the heartache gradually subsided, leaving only memories. Once Anastasia heard a song performed by a famous artist, and the words fell into her soul. "Before, I did not listen to my mother. I lived everything with my own mind. Everything seemed to know better. I stood my ground and, satisfied with myself, quite everything Anastasia thought. I didn't believe that if my sweetheart said something to me, it meant it was all right. But it's true," she reflected. "I didn't listen to my mom once. She said I shouldn't marry Nick. I wouldn't be happy with him. I loved him dearly and thought that thanks to my love he would change and we would live well and long. Alas, that didn't happen. But I am sure that all good things are still ahead of me.